The first time Alara noticed the time 27, it was carved into the margin of one of her drafting sheets. She had no memory of writing it. The number repeated itself across her notebooks after that, sometimes as neat script, sometimes as if etched with a blunt pencil dragged too hard across the page. She told herself it was exhaustion, long nights, the blur of assignments, but she never admitted to anyone that it was also the time Liam died. Her roommate's fall had been tidy in the official report. Slipped railing, wet shoes, no evidence of foul play. Yet the library stairs still smelled faintly of iron where his body had struck. Even 9 months later, Elara swore she caught the metallic tang when the hall grew too quiet. The library had not released her since. St. Avon's Library was not the sort of place you visited willingly after hours. Its ceiling seemed built to press sound down, not let it go. The lamps were honey-dim, their glow failing before it touched the rafters. The tower above ticked and shifted, a constant spinal rhythm in the walls, as though the building had its own pulse. Elara was drawn to that pulse the way others are drawn to ocean waves. Half comfort, half threat. She claimed the same table each night, beneath a lancet window streaked with grime. Her classmates teased her, called her the watcher in the tower. She laughed with them, but in truth she felt the building was watching her. There was a story that drifted from freshman to freshman each fall. If you pressed your name against the glass of the reading room at 2:07 a.m., the tower would return it not as an echo, but as a voice carrying someone else's last secret. Nobody ever admitted trying it. Yet each year a student dropped out quietly before spring. Elara had ignored the tale until Liam's death. Since then, she could not. His last words before leaving their dorm, "If you knew what the tower knew," felt threaded to that legend. Now, tonight, she was the last soul awake in the lantern. Rain smeared the windows, turning the quad outside into a sheet of mercury. Her notes sprawled uselessly across the desk. And always, the clock. The pendulum thudded like a heartbeat above her. 1:42 in the morning. The time bled forward. She could leave, return to her dorm, bury herself under blankets. But the page of her notebook where she had scrawled 2-7 burned against her palm. She had written her name beneath it earlier, almost without thinking. Not in the assignment margins, not on a title page, just floating there, like a child practicing their signature. She traced it now with her fingertip. Elara Finch. It felt less like handwriting and more like a summons. The building shifted around her. Old pipes exhaled. Somewhere in the gallery above, wood flexed in a long groan. She looked up and saw the balcony rail, the same rail Liam had toppled from. For a second, she imagined a dark shape leaning against it, listening. She blinked. Nothing. Just the dust catching in the lamp's halo, but her pulse did not ease. She ripped the page from her notebook. The sound startled her more than it should have, as though she had broken something fragile. The paper trembled in her hand. The legend required you to place your name on the glass, to give the tower something to answer. Her phone screen glared. 1:59. She rose. The scrape of her chair across stone echoed too loudly, like someone dragging chains. Step by step, she crossed the reading room. Each stride felt heavier. The air pressed thick as if the books themselves were holding their breath. The chosen window loomed at the far end tall, arched, its frame swollen with age. Rain streaks caught the dim exit light, silvering like veins. Elara pressed the paper against the glass. It clung instantly, the damp surface sucking it into place. She laid her palm over her name, sealing it. Her reflection floated faint, rain blurred, her eyes hollowed by the lamp's weak spill. Her phone read 2:06. Seconds crawled, and in that fragile pause, she realized she was waiting not for Liam's secret, but for proof that he had not fallen alone, that the tower had witnessed, had chosen, had pushed. 2:07. The air shifted. A hinge groaned somewhere close. Alara's body went rigid. She did not turn, because the ritual, if the stories were true, had begun. The silence after 2:07 was not empty. It was heavy, like a lung that had inhaled but refused to exhale. Elara stood with her hand pressed against the paper, her palm slick against the glass, and felt the weight of the library bend inward around her. At first, it was only the clock, its rhythm slower, deeper, as if the pendulum had dropped into water. Then came the sound she had dreaded without realizing she had been waiting for it, the slow complaint of wood shifting behind her, a hinge groaning where no door should be. She fixed her gaze on her reflection. The rain warped it, smeared her face into a pale mask. Her pulse hammered so hard she half expected to see her own throat shaking in the glass. And then the voice came. Helada. Her name pulled through distance, faint and cracked, as though spoken into a tin can strung across miles of silence. She should have turned, should have faced the source, but her body refused. She stood pinned, like an insect beneath glass, staring at her warped reflection while the voice gathered behind her. Ilara, why did you forget? The words scraped raw. The cadence was familiar. It was Liam's voice, or close enough that the difference only deepened her terror. She forced her lips to move. The sound that came out was thin, almost childish. Liam, the library swallowed the word whole. Again. Why did you forget? She clenched her eyes shut. Forget what? Silence. Then a whisper closer than before. The tower knows. Her hand slid against the paper. She could feel the vibration of the building, not the mechanical hum of gears, but something more organic, like muscle twitching beneath skin. The instinct to run surged, but her feet felt nailed in place. She forced herself to peel her palm away from the window. The paper stayed, rain streaking over her name as though erasing it. The room behind her remained unseen, but she could feel it brimming, thick with the sensation of company. Not one presence, many. Their attention pressed against her back like a wall of breath. She dug her nails into her thigh until pain flared, anchoring her. Slowly, trembling, she turned. The reading room yawned before her, empty in the weak spill of the exit light. The long tables stretched in parallel lines, all deserted. Shadows held the gallery above, the carved rail a black seam against the ceiling. No one stood there. No one had moved, yet the words still coiled in her ears, as though whispered just moments ago. Why did you forget? She forced herself toward her desk. Each step sounded far too loud. The silence that followed made it worse, as if the building replayed the echo to itself. Savoring it, she sank into her chair, breath sharp and uneven. The lamp hissed faintly, a bulb older than her, its glow an anemic circle that barely kept the dark at bay. Her notebook lay open where she had left it. Her eyes dropped to the page where she had scrawled the numbers, 207. Beneath it, her name. And now, pressed over the ink, faint indentations she had not made. A second hand had dragged across the paper, pressing words that barely broke the surface. She leaned close, heart hammering. The impressions read, "Do not look up." Her scalp prickled, every strand of hair tightening. The instinct to obey battled with the sick compulsion to defy. She felt the weight above the balcony, the shadows, the rail where Liam had fallen. The warning could have been for him, written too late, or it could be for her now. Her throat dried. She whispered, as if to test if the silence still listened. What happens if I do? No answer. Only the slow grind of the clock, stretching seconds into something viscous and unbearable. Her eyes burned. She could not hold them down forever. The need to prove she was alone clawed at her chest. She lifted her gaze. The gallery rail stood where it always had, dust soft against wood. But between two of its uprights, where shadows usually pooled, the air was wrong. It seemed thicker, darker, as if someone stood there perfectly still, blending with the dark yet deeper than it. Her body froze. She could not make out features, only the impression of a figure too tall, its posture patient, its attention directed entirely at her. She blinked hard, hoping the blur of exhaustion would clear. But when her eyes reopened, the figure remained. Elada. The voice again, not from above this time, but pressed directly against her ear, warm enough that her skin goose-fleshed. She whipped her head sideways. No one. Only the echo of her own gasp bouncing through the rafters. She clutched the edge of the desk until her knuckles whitened. Her mind spat rationalities, stress, fatigue, guilt, but none explained the imprint carved into her page. None explained the chill at her neck. A thought slid, unwelcome but undeniable. The tower had answered. But what if it wasn't Liam? Her eyes darted back to the gallery. Empty rail, empty dark. She forced herself to breathe, shallow but steady, and reached for her phone. The screen burned against her vision. 2:12. She should go. She should gather her things and leave, never return after dark. But her hands refused to pack. Instead, she opened her camera. A fragile courage drove her if she could not trust her eyes. Perhaps she could trust the lens. She lifted the phone and snapped a photo of the window where her paper still clung. The flash burst, stark and white. It stung her eyes. The afterimage swam as she blinked. When her vision steadied, the paper was gone. Only rain streaked the glass. Her stomach hollowed. She opened the photo. The screen showed her silhouette by the window, head bowed, hand raised. Behind her reflection, a darker shape loomed, its hand clamped across her mouth. Her thumb jerked. The phone slipped, clattering to the floor. The screen cracked into a spider web, but the image still glowed. Her own frozen body, with a stranger's hand gripping her face, and her name on the paper beneath, pinned against the glass like a label. She forced her gaze up. The window was bare, empty save for rain. Her own reflection stared back, alone, but her skin still tingled where the unseen fingers had touched. She whispered into the silence, voice shaking. If it wasn't Liam, then who? No reply came, only the slow, deliberate toll of the clock, one heavy note at a time, counting forward as if nothing at all had happened. Ilara did not pick the phone up again. The broken screen pulsed faintly at her feet, the frozen image glaring through its web of cracks. She could not bring herself to touch it. The memory of that hand, its weight, its placement across her mouth still pressed into her skin like a bruise. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. Inhale, exhale. The library breathed with her. The timbers creaked as if ribs expanding. The tower above gave a slow grind, gears gnashing in patient rhythm. She opened her eyes again, half expecting to see the shadow looming inches from her face. But the reading room was as it had always been, deserted, dim, too vast for her single lamp to fill. She whispered to herself, "It isn't real." The words rang hollow. She tried again, firmer. "It isn't real." But the truth was carved into her notebook, indented in letters she had not written. "Do not look up." The truth stared at her from the broken phone, her reflection held captive by another hand. And the truth breathed inside her ear, invisible, yet undeniable. Liam's voice, and not Liam's, whispering her name. Something wanted her attention, something that had worn Liam's voice like a mask, then pressed closer until it could almost taste her fear. She gathered her papers, stacking them with clumsy haste. The scrape of pencil across wood startled her, though she had caused it herself. Every sound felt amplified, as if the silence itself leaned in to listen. She shoved the papers into her bag, her fingers trembling so hard they snagged on the zipper. She would leave. She would never return after dark. That resolve burned clear in her mind. But when she rose to go, her body betrayed her. Her legs faltered, her chest locked tight. The exit doors across the room seemed impossibly far, like a horizon receding no matter how close she stepped. She forced herself forward anyway. Her shoes whispered against the stone. The aisles of shelves stretched endlessly, their books stacked like mute witnesses. She avoided glancing upward, though the urge gnawed at her neck. The warning, "Do not look up," pulsed behind her eyes. Halfway across the reading room, the air changed. It was a subtle thing, a shift in temperature, the prickling of her skin as though she had stepped into a draft. She paused, heart pounding, telling herself it was the old building's way of exhaling. Then she heard it. A second set of footsteps, matching hers, half a beat behind. She froze. The echo froze too. Her throat tightened. Slowly, without turning, she began walking again. The steps resumed. She quickened her pace. So did they. Her hand darted to her phone out of instinct, forgetting it lay shattered on the desk behind her. She reached into her pocket, finding only the cool keys of her dorm. They jingled faintly, and for a split second she swore she heard another set jingle back, as though mimicking her. At the door she nearly broke into a run. Her hand pressed against the cold brass bar, shoving. It did not budge. She pushed harder. The mechanism clanked, but the door held as though fused shut. Panic clawed her chest. She shoved again, shoulder braced, teeth clenched. Nothing. Behind her, the footsteps stopped. She refused to turn. Her pulse thundered in her ears, so loud she thought she might faint. She pressed her forehead against the wood of the door, whispering through clenched teeth, "Please, open, please." The silence lengthened. Then came the whisper, "Ilara," right at the base of her neck. Warm, patient. She spun, her back pressed to the door, fists raised though she had no weapon. The room was empty. The lamplight shimmered across the rows of tables, across the darkened shelves. Nothing moved. Yet the air shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from the floor. Her knees buckled. She slid down against the door, clutching her bag to her chest. And then, above her, the clock began to toll. 1, 2, 3. The sound shook the rafters. She lost count, the strikes overlapping until it was less a rhythm than a roar, reverberating through her ribs. Her teeth rattled. Heskine vibrated. When the tolling ceased, she opened her eyes. The gallery rail above no longer looked empty. A figure leaned against it, its silhouette elongated by shadow. Not Liam. Taller, broader, its head tilted in a way that suggested curiosity rather than grief. It did not move, but the posture radiated possession, as though the library itself had finally chosen a body. Her breath came ragged. She wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in her throat, pinned there by terror. The figure's head cocked further, impossibly far, until its outline looked broken. Then it straightened, and in the silence that followed, a new voice rose. Not Liam's. Not even close. You gave me your name. The words were smooth, unhurried, as though spoken by someone who had been waiting centuries to finally speak aloud. Her body went cold. She remembered the paper pressed to the window, her name written bold. She had not given it to Liam. She had given it to the tower. What do you want? She whispered. The answer slid like oil. Not memory, not voice, more. And her fingernails bit into her palms. She forced herself to ask, more what? The figure did not reply. It only leaned further over the rail, and the shadows beneath it stretched as though reaching for her. Elara scrambled to her feet, her back still pressed to the door. The knob rattled under her hand, but the lock refused her again. She pounded it with her fist, her cries bouncing uselessly off stone. When she turned back, the gallery was empty once more. Only the silence remained. But now she understood what had been implied. The voice did not want to remind her of Liam. It wanted to use him as bait. It wanted something alive, and she had already given it her name. Her hands shook as she clutched the straps of her bag. The question that gnawed at her now was not how to escape, but whether she had already forfeited that chance the moment she pressed the paper to glass. Because what the tower wanted was not a whisper. It was her. Elara had always believed buildings carried memory in their bones. That was the romance of studying architecture. Each stone carried the echo of hands that set it. Each arch carried the weight of centuries. But she had never imagined a building could hunger. Now, standing at the locked door, she felt it. The library no longer seemed indifferent. It had shifted around her, every wall listening, every shadow leaning forward. The air itself pressed against her skin, slow and suffocating. She whispered her own name, as if to anchor herself. Elara Finch. The syllables quivered in the silence, fragile as glass. And then, from above, the reply came. Elara. Drawn out, savored, spoken as though tasting her. She lifted her eyes to the gallery. The silhouette stood there again, clearer now, less shadow and more shape. Broad shoulders hunched beneath the rafters, its head angled down, the darkness pooling where a face should have been. Yet she felt its eyes upon her, prying, measuring. Her pulse thundered. She tried the door again, jamming her shoulder against it, but the wood did not yield. She might as well have been pushing against stone. The figure leaned forward, its hands settling on the rail. They were not hands at all, but long, thin extensions of dark, bending too many joints as they hooked over the wood. What are you? She whispered. The figure cocked its head, and the entire building seemed to answer in chorus. The moan of timber, the grind of gears, the hiss of pipes, a dozen small noises folding into one, saying nothing yet declaring itself. Not a ghost, not Liam, something larger, something that had worn every secret whispered in this place and made them its own. You gave me your name, it said again. The words resonated through the stone, sinking into her chest like a weight. I didn't mean to, she rasped. You thought it would be safe. Her throat closed. She could not deny it. The rail above creaked. Slowly, impossibly. The figure leaned further over the edge until its upper body dangled into the air. It should have fallen, but it clung like a spider, its limbs bending in wrong angles as it lowered itself down. Elara stumbled backward, her back still pressed to the locked door. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The entity's voice deepened, layered now, as if a dozen throats spoke in unison. Names or doors. You opened yours. The rafters shuddered. Dust fell like ash. The clock began to grind louder, its pendulum hammering as though striking metal. Ilara's hands clawed at the door behind her. Frantic, she turned, pulling at the handle, slamming it with her fist. Nothing. The hinges trembled but would not release. When she faced the room again, the figure had reached the floor. It was not a man, not even a shadow shaped like one. It was an absence, a void that made the lamplight recoil. Its limbs dragged against the stone with a sound like nails over slate, yet its posture was calm, steady, as if it had all the time in the world. She pressed tighter against the door, every nerve screaming. "What do you want?" The voice unfurled through the cavernous space, patient, deliberate, to be remembered. She shook her head. "You're not real." I am what is left when memory is abandoned, when voices are silenced, when names are carved and forgotten. I am what the tower keeps." The books on the shelves rattled, spines clapping like teeth. Dust hissed from the rafters. The floor beneath her trembled, the seams between stones groaning. Ilara dropped to her knees, clutching her ears. Though the sound was not heard but felt, it reverberated inside her skull. The figure stepped closer, its movements fluid, too fluid, as if gliding rather than walking. The shadow stretched until it kissed the tips of her shoes. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Take your secret and leave me." A pause, then softly, with a weight that crushed her chest. "Not secret, not voice. You." Her heart seized. The meaning was plain now. The ritual had never been about receiving whispers. It had always been about surrender, about giving the tower a new memory to keep, a new voice to claim. Her. The building convulsed. The lamps flickered. The glass rattled in its frames. The clock struck again. Once, twice, 3 times, though no hour had passed. Each toll shook her bones, stealing her breath. She crawled along the wall, desperate, searching for any escape. The stone was cold, unyielding. Her fingernails scraped uselessly across mortar. The shadow followed, unhurried, each step like the groan of the foundation itself. Her vision blurred. She thought of Liam, of his laughter, of the way he had left their dorm muttering about the tower. Had he heard this same voice? Had he given his name willingly? Or had it been taken from him mid-fall? Her body shook with sobs. "Why me?" The answer poured from the dark, steady and cruel. "Because you stayed." The rafters cracked. A beam groaned, splitting. The floor shuddered beneath her. Books rained from the shelves, slamming to the ground in violent thuds. The library was collapsing, folding inward like a beast curling to swallow its prey. Ilara stumbled forward, dodging the falling debris. She ran blindly through the aisles, but each turn stretched longer than it should, each row of shelves repeating itself as though the architecture bent to keep her inside. She tripped, sprawling across the stone. Pain flared in her knees, but she forced herself up. Ahead, through the haze of dust, she saw it, the window where she had pressed her name. Her paper was back on the glass, clinging as if it had never left. The sight pierced her like a hook. If she could tear it down, if she could rip her name free, maybe she could undo this. Maybe she could close the door she had opened. She lunged toward it. The shadow surged too, stretching along the floor faster than her own body could move. She reached the window, slamming her palm against the paper. It held firm, the damp glass sealing it like skin. She clawed at the edges, fingernails tearing. Behind her, the voice rose, no longer a whisper but a roar that shook the glass itself. "You are mine." The paper ripped. Her name tore in two, jagged across the page. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the tower screamed. The sound was not of gears or bells, but of every secret ever swallowed, exhaled at once. It was grief and rage and hunger braided together, a torrent that drove her to her knees. The glass splintered beneath her hand, cracks spiderwebbed outward. Her reflection stared back, doubled and warped by the fracture. And in that reflection, she saw not herself, but dozens of faces layered over her, students, strangers, all hollow-eyed, all mouthing the same word. Her name. The cracks widened. The window bulged as though a great weight pressed from outside. Her palm stuck fast to the glass, the shards biting her skin. She pulled, but the reflection pulled back harder. its lips moving, its hand pressing over her mouth, just as in the photo. Her scream never escaped. The last thing she saw before the glass gave way was the clock's pendulum swinging like a blade, carving the air in slow, merciless rhythm. The window gave way not in a shatter but in a sigh, as if the glass had been waiting all along for permission to dissolve. The crack spread in silence, blossoming like veins of ice, until the pane slumped into dust across the sill. Ilara fell forward onto her hands. She expected to feel the rush of night air, the cold sting of rain on her face. Instead, her palms struck stone. Not the stone floor of the library, but something rougher, coarser, stretched into impossible distance. She lifted her head. The reading room was gone. In its place stretched a corridor of arches, endless, each lined with windows that were not windows but mirrors. Every surface reflected her, but never the same version. In one she stood older, her eyes ringed with shadows. In another she was younger, hair tied back, clutching books to her chest. In another she did not move at all, her face slack, lips pale, her breath hitched. She pressed her hand to the nearest mirror. The reflection did not follow. Instead, it pressed its hand flat on the other side, fingers outstretched, eyes staring with a hunger that was not hers. She tore her hand back. The mirror quivered as if disappointed. Behind her, the corridor sealed itself. The library door, the rain, the lamp all gone. Only arches, mirrors, and her own name whispering faintly from nowhere. Elada. The voice was no longer distant. It surrounded her, carried by the stone itself. She spun, but the corridor looked the same in every direction. "What do you want from me?" she shouted. The echoes multiplied her words, folding them into whispers until they no longer sounded like her voice. The reply came smooth and sure. "To keep you." She backed away, stepped stumbling, until her heel struck the base of another mirror. This reflection did not mimic her. It simply stood with its head bowed, a hand clamped over its mouth. His stomach knotted. She remembered the photograph on her phone, the cracked image of herself with that impossible hand pinning her silent. She realized now it had not been a mistake. It had been a glimpse of where she belonged. She collapsed to her knees, tears burning. "Please, not me." The voice softened, almost tender. "You gave me your name." She shook her head, sobs strangling her throat. "I didn't know what it meant." "You knew enough." The mirrors rattled, each reflection beginning to move. Hundreds of Elaras turning their heads, blinking, raising their hands in unison. The sound of glass against stone was deafening. One by one, they pressed their palms flat against the inside of the mirrors. The corridor filled with the slap of skin against glass, rhythmic, insistent. She clutched her ears, curling forward. The noise burrowed into her skull, a pulse of ownership, a chant without words. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer kneeling on stone. She was back in the library, slumped against the shattered frame of the reading room window. Rain lashed across her face. The smell of dust and old paper filled her lungs. For a moment she thought it was over, that she had pulled herself free. Then she noticed the paper. It still clung to the glass, though the pane had broken. Her name was written there, but not in her own handwriting anymore. The letters had stretched, thickened, curling into forms that looked older than language. The ink bled as though alive, dripping slowly down the page. She pushed herself up, weak and trembling. Her phone lay at her feet, its screen still glowing through the cracks. The image of her reflection remained, herself pinned silent by another's hand. She reached for the device, but the moment her fingers brushed it, the screen flickered and went black. The clock began to toll. Once, twice, 3 times, though dawn was hours away. Each strike shook the room, rattling the shelves until books toppled like bodies. Dust poured from the rafters in a storm. Ilara screamed, though she could not hear the sound. She felt her throat convulse, but no cry emerged. The silence pressed heavier than any noise. Her hand flew to her mouth. Something was there. Not a hand of flesh, not anything she could see. But the weight was undeniable, fingers invisible yet crushing down over her lips. She clawed at the air, nails tearing at nothing. The grip only tightened. Her legs buckled. She sank to the floor, back against the cold glass, eyes wide, gasping for breath she could not draw. The last thing she saw was her reflection in the broken pane. Not herself, not entirely. The face looking back was hers, but the eyes were not. They were patient, ancient, filled with the stillness of a predator who has waited long enough. The pendulum swung, cutting the silence into halves, and then there was nothing. Morning came hours later. A security guard making rounds found the library doors locked from within, though the inside showed no sign of anyone present. Only a single desk lamp still burned, buzzing weakly, its circle of light illuminating a cracked phone and a scattering of papers. Among them lay a single page pressed to the glass. It bore no name, just a black smear, as if the letters had bled together until they became unreadable. By noon, whispers spread across campus. A student had not returned to her dorm. No one remembered seeing her leave the library. Some claimed the guard must have missed her. Others said she had dropped out quietly, like the stories always hinted. But by nightfall, the legend had changed. They said if you pressed your name against the library window at 2-7, the tower would answer, not with secrets, not with whispers, but with silence. And in the silence, you would feel a hand close over your mouth, keeping you quiet forever. The students laughed uneasily, retelling it in dorm hallways, across dining tables, late at night when they should have been asleep. They swore they would never try. They swore it was only a story. Still, some of them wrote the numbers in their notebooks without meaning to. Still, some of them woke in the night to the sound of the pendulum swinging. And still, the tower waited. It would always wait. Story 2. The Perpetual Diner. Marcus had been driving for hours. The road beneath his tires had long ago turned from asphalt to patched tar, then narrowed into a strip of cracked pavement that seemed to coil without end. The storm had found him early in the evening and had not let go. Rain hammered the windshield in heavy sheets, the wipers dragging useless arcs across the glass. The headlights caught only the shimmer of water and the occasional fence post before darkness swallowed it again. He told himself he knew where he was. The map on his phone insisted he had missed only one turn, that he could rejoin the highway in 12 more miles. But his phone had lost signal an hour ago, and the battery bar now bled red. The world outside his car was uninhabited. No gas stations, no farmhouses with their porch lights, no cars passing in either direction, just the endless thrum of rain, the hiss of tires on wet pavement, and the creeping sense that he had slipped off the edges of the map entirely. Marcus had driven rural routes before, but this was different. This stretch of road felt abandoned, not simply by people but by time. The mile markers had long since vanished. The trees pressed close, their branches thrashing in the storm, a black canopy shaking as though in warning. His eyes burned from staring too long into the dark. He thought of pulling over, letting the rain ease before driving again. But the ditches were already flooding, and the shoulders offered no safety. He muttered aloud, just to break the silence. 12 more miles. That's it. But the words did not comfort him. They fell flat against the glass and were drowned by the storm. Minutes bled into each other. The dashboard clock clicked forward. 12:14, 12:22, 12:37. The numbers felt unreal, disconnected. He had the strange impression that the road beneath him was not moving at all, that his car was a treadmill of steel and rubber, grinding forward without covering ground. And then, without warning, the diner appeared. Its neon glow cut through the curtain of rain, sharp and saturated, colors so bright they seemed ripped from another decade. A single word pulsed in electric pink above the roof. Diner. The letters buzzed faintly, each flicker bouncing across the wet asphalt. Marcus blinked, relief mixing with unease. There was no town here, no crossroads, yet the diner stood planted firmly at the roadside, squat and silver, its windows glowing warm against the storm. The lot beside it was empty except for a single rusting pickup that looked decades too old to still be running. His stomach knotted. He had not realized until now how hungry he was. The thought of coffee, hot, black, bitter, pulled him like a rope. He swung the car into the lot. The engine shuddered as he cut it, headlights dimming. Rain drummed harder against the roof. For a moment he sat with his hands still gripping the wheel, staring at the neon sign. Something about the way the letters pulsed made his temples ache, as though each flicker was syncing with his heartbeat. Diner, diner, diner. He swallowed, shoved the door open, and stepped out. The rain struck him like gravel, soaking through his jacket in seconds. He jogged across the lot, shoes splashing through shallow pools, and reached the chrome handle of the glass door. It was warm under his hand, warmer than it should have been in the storm. He pulled. The door swung easily, and a bell overhead chimed once. Inside, the noise of the storm collapsed into silence. The air smelled of coffee and grease, heavy but not unpleasant. The diner gleamed under fluorescent light, counters polished, booths upholstered in deep red vinyl. A jukebox rested against the far wall. Though no music played, Marcus froze just inside the threshold. Every head in the diner had turned toward him. There were 7 booths in all. 6 of them were occupied. Each booth held a single figure, seated alone, eyes fixed downward at the plates in front of them. No one ate. No one moved. The silence was so complete he could hear the tick of the ceiling fan as it turned above. At the counter stood a man who might once have been tall but had since stooped into age. His hair was thin, his apron stained, his expression unreadable. He held a coffee pot in one hand, motionless, as though he had been pouring when Marcus entered and had simply forgotten to finish. The bell above the door gave one last metallic shiver. Then the silence closed again, thick as wool. Marcus cleared his throat. Evening. Sorry to barge in. Hell of a storm out there. The words sounded strange in the room. Too loud, too hopeful. The old man set the coffee pot on the counter. His voice, when it came, was steady and low. Take a seat, son. Marcus hesitated, then slid into the nearest booth. The vinyl groaned softly beneath him. His jacket dripped onto the floor. For a moment, no one moved. The 6 figures remained bent over their meals, hands folded, eyes trained on the plates as if mesmerized. The old man moved slowly down the counter, his shoes whispering against the tile, and stopped in front of Marcus. What'll it be? Coffee, Marcus said quickly. Black, please. The old man nodded once. He moved back behind the counter, reaching for the pot. His hands were steady, though his movements had the quality of repetition, as if this moment had played out countless times before. Marcus forced himself to relax, peeling his damp jacket from his shoulders. He rubbed his hands together, trying to chase away the cold, but the silence clung stubbornly. Even the 6 customers seemed unreal, their stillness absolute. His eyes drifted to the nearest booth. The figure there was a woman, middle-aged, her hair pinned neatly back. A slice of pie sat before her, untouched. Her hands rested on the table's edge, fingers curled, knuckles pale. She did not blink. Marcus looked away, unease crawling his skin. The old man set the mug before him. The coffee steamed faintly. The smell was rich, grounding. Marcus wrapped his fingers around it, letting the warmth seep into his palms. You're soaked through, the man said. Yeah, Marcus answered with a weak laugh. Got turned around in the storm. No signal out here. Thought I'd never find a place. The old man gave no reply. Marcus lifted the cup, sipping carefully. The coffee was scalding, but it jolted him awake. Cleared his head for a breath. He set it down, exhaling, and tried again to bridge the silence. This place is out of the way. Still no answer. Marcus swallowed, his throat tight. His gaze drifted once more to the silent customers. 6 figures, all perfectly still. None raised a fork. None turned a page of a menu. None even seemed to breathe. A flicker of doubt ran cold through him. He forced himself to speak again, though his voice came out quieter. How late do you stay open? The old man met his eyes at last. His own were clouded, pale gray, as late as we need to. The words hung in the air, final as stone. Marcus gripped his mug tighter. The storm still beat against the glass outside, though the sound was muffled, distant, as if the diner had sealed itself off from the world entirely. For the first time, he wondered if he had truly found this place, or if the place had found him. Marcus sipped his coffee too quickly, desperate to anchor himself in something ordinary. The heat scalded his tongue, but he welcomed the pain. It was proof of reality, proof he was still in a world of boiling water and porcelain mugs and chipped counters. The old man leaned against the register, his gray eyes fixed on him with the stillness of a photograph. Marcus cleared his throat, tried to summon a smile. Storm should let up soon, I hope. Once it does, I'll get back on the road. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering this, then shook it once, slow and deliberate. There's no road worth taking after this. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? The man reached for the coffee pot, topped off Marcus's cup even though it was still half full. The liquid swirled black as ink. This diner, the man said, serves only those who have nowhere left to go. You came in because you belong. Seventh chair, seventh cup. The balance holds. Marcus let out a nervous laugh. Come on. I just got turned around in the storm. The man did not laugh. Behind him, the ceiling fan ticked once. A sound that did not repeat. The silence thickened again. Marcus shifted in the booth, suddenly too aware of the 6 figures seated around him. They had not moved since he arrived. He forced himself to look at them one by one. The woman with the untouched pie. A man in a gray suit, his tie crooked, staring at a plate of eggs that had gone slick with grease. A teenager, maybe 16, hair damp as though from rain, holding a glass of milk that had long since lost its chill. A woman in a nurse's uniform, her hands resting in her lap. 2 more, an old man with a hat pulled low. A young woman with braids. Each sat utterly still. Each stared at their meal as though hypnotized. Not one blinked. Marcus whispered, "What's wrong with them?" The old man poured himself a cup, set the pot back on the burner. "Nothing's wrong, they're eating. They're not moving." The man's lips curled faintly. Not a smile, but the ghost of one. Not everyone eats the same way. Marcus's stomach twisted. He gripped his cup tighter, as though the heat could shield him from the words. "Look, I appreciate the coffee, really, but I should go." "My car," the man cut him off with a single raised finger. "Your car isn't waiting." Marcus froze. The man continued, calm as if reciting a weather report. "It was over before you came in. You walked here because there was nowhere else to walk. This is the only place left." Marcus's laugh was brittle. "That's insane. I drove in. My car's right outside." "Is it?" Marcus pushed back from the booth so suddenly the table rattled. He crossed the diner in 3 strides, palms slamming against the glass door. Rain lashed outside, the neon sign buzzing, and there was his car, just where he had left it, silver, shining wet in the storm. Relief flooded him. He almost laughed again. Then he leaned closer, squinting through the storm. The car shimmered faintly, as though submerged in water. The headlights flickered even though he had switched them off. And the reflection in the puddles around it showed not a car parked upright, but one overturned, crushed metal glinting in the dark, steam hissing from a hood bent in half. Marcus staggered back, his breath seized. The old man's voice drifted from behind him. "You see now, you're the 7th. Marcus turned, trembling. No, I'm alive. I drove here. I walked in through that door." The old man's gaze did not waver. Alive, dead words don't matter much in this place. What matters is you have no destination left. That's the price of entry. Marcus's mouth worked soundlessly. He glanced at the 6 again, desperate for some spark of recognition, some sign they were only customers like him. The woman with the pie sat unmoved, but now he noticed the corner of her jaw. A thin crack ran along the line of her neck, dark against her pale skin, as if the flesh were wax beginning to split. The man in the suit had the same crack, thinner, running from his temple down into his collar. The teenager's hand trembled faintly, not with life, but with the stiffness of cooling wax. Marcus's stomach lurched. He staggered back to his booth, gripping the table edge. The coffee in his cup rippled. He forced his eyes down, hoping for the comfort of that ordinary darkness. Instead, the surface showed him something else. Not the ceiling lights, not his own face. The reflection showed the mangled wreck of a car at the bottom of a ravine, wheels twisted skyward, glass shattered, metal shrieking faintly as the storm beat down. His car, Marcus's breath broke into gasps. He pushed the mug away so hard it sloshed across the counter. The old man stepped closer, voice soft as though offering kindness. "Drink. It helps if you drink." Marcus shook his head violently. "No, I'm not. This isn't real. I just need to wake up." The man leaned forward, his eyes clouded and infinite. "Son, you don't wake up from here. You stay. That's all there is." Marcus pressed his hands against his temples, shutting his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. He opened them again and looked to the booths. All 6 figures now had their heads turned toward him. Every one of them. Their eyes were fixed, wide, glassy, unblinking. Marcus' voice cracked. "No." The old man poured another stream of coffee, filling his cup to the brim. The smell was sharper now, bitter enough to burn his throat even from a distance. "You're the 7th, the man repeated, as if the words themselves sealed the fact. "Sit, drink. There is nowhere else." Marcus looked at the door, at the storm, at the neon sign pulsing against the night. The word diner flickered in rhythm with his heartbeat. Each pulse hammered the truth deeper. He had crossed into a place that was not on any map, a place that waited only for those who had already reached their end. He sat down slowly, because his legs no longer had the strength to stand. The coffee steamed before him. The 6 others returned their gaze to their plates, movements synchronized, as though pulled by the same unseen hand. Marcus's reflection quivered in the surface of his cup. It did not blink when he did. He whispered almost to himself, "I still have somewhere to go." The old man's hand pressed flat against the table. His voice carried finality, cold as stone. "You don't." Marcus had not touched the coffee since the old man refilled it. The mug sat steaming before him, the surface quivering faintly as if the liquid had its own pulse. He kept his hands pressed against his thighs, afraid that the moment he wrapped his fingers around it, the moment he drank, something final would be sealed. The 6 customers had returned their gaze to their meals, but Marcus could not stop glancing at them. Something about their stillness was worse now, as if by acknowledging him earlier, they had revealed the falseness of their postures. He watched the woman with the pie, and his stomach twisted. The crack along her jaw had deepened, faint, waxy flakes scattered like dandruff onto the table beneath her chin. The man in the gray suit shifted slightly, a movement so slow it seemed almost unintentional. His tie slid crooked, revealing a seam along his throat like 2 halves of molded wax pressed together. Marcus's breath grew shallow. He tried to convince himself these were illusions, his storm-battered mind inventing horrors in the fluorescence. But the teenager in the next booth twitched, and the skin at his temple pulled back from the movement, peeling in a way that no living skin ever could. Marcus pressed a hand to his mouth, bile rising. The old man watched him calmly from behind the counter. He had not poured himself another cup. He simply stood, patient, as though he had all eternity to wait. Marcus whispered, "What are they?" The old man tilted his head, as though considering the question. "They are who came before. They were as you are. Now they stay. They're not alive." The old man's eyes gleamed faintly in the fluorescent hum. "Alive, dead. Words don't matter here. They've taken their seats. That is what matters." Marcus shook his head violently. "No, I can't. I won't." He pushed back from the booth, rising unsteadily. His legs ached as though he had been sitting far longer than a single cup of coffee could explain. He stumbled toward the glass door. The neon sign buzzed outside, pulsing pink into the rain. Diner, diner, diner. He pressed his hands against the door. Cold glass. Beyond it, his car waited in the lot. For a heartbeat, hope surged. He yanked at the handle. The door opened easily. Rain lashed his face, cold and sharp. Relief nearly doubled him over. He stepped out into the storm, gulping the wet air as if it could wash the diner's stillness from his lungs. But when he turned toward his car, he froze. It was not in the lot, not as it should have been. The silver body was still there, but flipped on its roof, wheels spinning slowly in the floodwater. Headlights flickered like dying eyes. And when he blinked, the image changed again. Now the lot was empty. Now it was full of rusted shells of cars. Now it was nothing but endless dark roads stretching in both directions. Marcus stumbled backward. His shoulder struck the bell above the door, and its chime echoed far too loud, vibrating through his ribs. He spun back inside. The diner was exactly as it had been. The 6 figures sat at their booths. The old man polished a mug with his rag, slow and unhurried. But something was different. Marcus's booth was not empty. He saw himself sitting there. The other Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the steaming cup. His face was pale, waxen, the skin along his temple beginning to crack like the others. He did not blink. He did not look up. He simply stared into the coffee as if it held all that remained of the world. Marcus's throat closed. He stumbled toward the booth, half in denial, half desperate. But when he reached for the shoulder of the figure, his hand passed through air. No resistance, no flesh, only the faint warmth of steam rising from the mug. He reeled back, gasping. His double did not stir. The old man's voice drifted from behind him, calm as a hymn. "It is easier if you sit. Sooner or later. You all sit." Marcus turned, wild-eyed. "No, that's not me. That's not me." The man wiped the rim of the mug, his eyes downcast. "Not yet, but soon." "All fair." Marcus staggered toward the counter, slamming his palms against the wood. "Tell me what this place is." The old man set the rag aside, folded his hands. It is the diner. That is enough. There has to be a way out. The man's gaze flicked to the 6 booths, then back to Marcus. His voice softened. Out? Out to where? You've already arrived at the end of the road. Marcus's breath came ragged. He spun again to the door, but the glass reflected only the diner's interior now. No rain, no storm, only endless reflections of himself layered into infinity. His knees buckled. He pressed his forehead against the glass, sobs shaking him. He whispered, "Please, I just need to go home." The reflection whispered back, lips moving though he had not spoken. The words were faint, distorted but unmistakable. Home is gone. Marcus stumbled back, trembling. His cup still steamed at the booth. His double still sat, waiting, frozen in posture. He realized, with a shudder that hollowed his chest, that he had already begun to join them. The stiffness in his knees, the ache in his shoulders, the way his skin felt stretched too tight across his face, it was not fatigue. It was the wax settling. He dug his nails into his arms until blood beaded. For now, it still came. For now, he was still flesh. But how long until even that gave way? The old man's voice broke the silence once more. Unhurried. Inevitable. You'll find it easier once you accept the coffee. They always do. Marcus's gaze slid unwillingly back to the cup. Steam still rose, curling like fingers. And in the dark surface, his reflection leaned closer. Eyes hollow, mouth unmoving. Already seated. Already waiting. Marcus staggered away from the booth where his double Saturday. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, lungs pulling nothing but the thick, grease-scented air of the diner. His mind screamed for movement, for flight, for any direction that might take him away from the steaming cup and the waxen faces. He bolted for the door again. His shoulder struck the handle, his palms shoved against the glass. It opened too easily this time. He hurled himself through, expecting the slap of rain, the cold sting of midnight. Instead, he fell into another diner. The same chrome counters, the same booths, the same neon glow humming overhead. Only this one was empty. No old man at the counter. No silent 6. Only the long rows of red vinyl booths, stretching farther than they should, dissolving into shadow at the edges of his vision. His heart stuttered. He spun back, reaching for the door he'd just crossed. But behind him there was only more booths, lined up like ribs inside a great beast. No. His voice cracked. No, no, no. He ran. He didn't care which direction. His shoes smacked against tile, his breath tearing in his throat. Booth after booth after booth, each one identical, glowing faintly beneath ceiling lights that never flickered. He passed a table where steam rose from a fresh cup of coffee. Another held a plate of eggs congealed into rubber. Another a slice of pie, crust collapsing under syrup. He stumbled faster, panic propelling him, until the booths blurred into sameness. But when he finally slowed, gasping, he realized the booths were no longer empty. The 6 were there again. The woman with the pie, the man in the suit, the nurse, the teenager, the braided girl, the old man with the hat, each in their booths, staring down, hands folded, faces cracked like wax in summer heat. Marcus spun, searching for another route, but every path bent back toward them. No matter how many booths he passed, no matter how many turns he thought he took, the 6 returned, silent, unblinking, eternal. He screamed, the sound ripping from his throat. "Let me out!" The ceiling lights flickered for the first time. Not out, but faster, sharper, strobing in a rhythm that made the booths pulse like arteries. The neon outside buzzed through unseen walls, its pink light bleeding across the chrome. Diner, diner, diner. Marcus clutched his head. "I don't belong here." The old man's voice floated from everywhere at once. "You do. You drove the last road. You reached the end. This is what waits when there is no next mile." Marcus's eyes burned. "I have a life. I wasn't supposed to stop. You already did." The words sank into his bones, heavy as lead. He stumbled against a booth, his palm striking the table. The plate there shook. He looked down and saw himself seated across from him, already stiffening, his face splitting along the jawline. Marcus reeled back. The coffee spilled, steaming across the table, but instead of dripping onto tile, it ran upward, clinging to the air like oil. rising until it smeared across the ceiling. His stomach turned. He ran again. Wild, blind. The corridor of booths warped, narrowing, tilting, becoming a hall of doors instead. Each door was marked with a single word glowing faintly. Exit. Relief flared. He lunged for the nearest, yanking it open. Inside was another diner. Smaller, darker. The same booths. The same smell of grease and coffee. And at the counter sat the old man, waiting, his apron freshly white. Marcus slammed the door. He spun to another exit. He pulled it open, desperate. Another diner, another counter, another old man, identical, polishing another mug. Door after door, exit after exit. Each led back to the same place. He screamed until his throat tore. The sound was swallowed by the endless chrome and tile. When he turned back down the corridor, the six were waiting again. They were closer now, not seated but standing in the aisles. Their faces hung half off their skulls, wax crumbling, mouths slack. Their eyes glistened, but not with life, only with the shine of something molten beneath. Marcus stumbled backward. His heel caught the edge of a step he had not seen. He fell hard, his back striking stone, and realized the tile floor had given way to something else. A staircase, downward. The steps stretched into shadow, vanishing into depths. The air from below smelled of burned sugar and old grease. Above him, the six loomed, their heads tilting in unnatural unison. The cracks in their faces widened, splitting into fissures that leaked faint glows of red. They began to descend, silent, step by step, their shoes making no sound. Marcus scrambled downward, his hands scraping against stone. The stairwell narrowed, pressing in. His breaths echoed raggedly. He didn't dare look back. The steps ended at another door. His hands slammed against it, clawing the handle. He threw it open. Light spilled across him. He stood once more in the diner. The booths, the counter, the neon glow, the smell of coffee, and his own seat. Waiting, his cup still steamed. The old man stood behind the counter, calm, his voice low and final. You see now, there's nowhere else. The diner is the road's end. And Marcus fell to his knees, shaking, the strength gone from his body, his vision blurred, his chest heaving. The six filed silently into their booths, resuming their stillness. One by one, they lowered their eyes back to their meals, as though nothing had disturbed them at all. Marcus pressed his palms against the floor. He wanted to rise, to scream, to claw at the glass until it shattered, but his legs felt heavy, his arms numb. His body no longer obeyed him. The old man stepped forward, refilled the coffee. Steam curled upward, black and bitter. Marcus tried to say no, tried to plead, but his lips would not part. His jaw held stiff, locked by something unseen. His breath rasped behind clenched teeth, and in the dark surface of the coffee, he saw himself again, already seated, already waiting, already still. The neon buzzed overhead. Diner, diner, diner. The word pressed into his mind like a brand. And Marcus understood that the diner was not a place he had found. It was a place that had found him. The coffee steamed. The curls of vapor rose into the fluorescent light, twisting like hands beckoning him closer. Marcus knelt on the tile, every muscle trembling, unable to rise. The booths loomed around him. The six silent patrons returned to their meals. They had not moved during his flight, his descent, his desperate grasp for exits. They had only waited, and now they were waiting still. His own booth yawned open, patient as a grave. The old man stood at the counter, mug in hand, eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that was not unkind. It was worse than cruelty. It was inevitability. Sit, the man said. Marcus shook his head. It was a weak denial, more reflex than defiance. His limbs were heavy, his throat dry, his chest hollow. I can't, the words cracked. I can't be part of this. You already are. And the old man slid the mug forward, the dark liquid trembling within. The only choice left is how long you struggle before you drink. Marcus dragged himself to the edge of the booth, clutching the vinyl seat. His hands left streaks of sweat on the red cushion. He wanted to scream, to fight, but the effort slipped away like water through fingers. He sank onto the seat, shuddering. The table before him gleamed faintly, the coffee waiting at its center. His reflection hovered on its surface. He looked older, paler, as though weeks had passed in minutes. His eyes were sunken, his skin too smooth, too waxen. "No," he whispered, but his hands moved without permission, wrapping around the mug. The heat did not burn. It seeped into him, filling the hollows, softening the tremors. He lifted it, the rim brushing his lips. The smell was bitter, endless, an abyss disguised as comfort. He paused, a sliver of will still holding. His gaze darted to the six. For the first time, they moved in unison. Slowly, deliberately, they raised their forks, their spoons, their knives. The gestures were mechanical, ceremonial. None lifted food to their mouths. They only stared down, arms poised, as though waiting for him to join. Marcus lowered the mug without drinking. "I won't." The old man's voice rolled across the counter. "You already did." Marcus blinked. The mug was empty. His throat burned with bitterness. His stomach churned with warmth. The taste coated his tongue, though he did not remember swallowing. "No." He shook his head. "I didn't." The old man leaned forward. His eyes were not gray anymore. They were black, polished, reflective, as though filled with the same liquid Marcus had just consumed. "You drank the moment you stepped inside." This was only the remembering. The ceiling fan ticked once. The sound echoed as though in a cavern. Marcus's vision blurred. His limbs stiffened. He raised his hands to his face and felt the skin along his temples smooth, too smooth, and cracking beneath his touch. Thin flakes curled away, falling onto the table like candle wax. His reflection in the coffee darkened. It no longer mimicked his movements. It simply stared, lips sealed, eyes wide and patient. Marcus tried to rise, to run again. His legs refused, his spine rooted into the vinyl. The booth clung to him like wet clay. His chest rose and fell slower. His breath thickened. The six returned their utensils to the table, their ritual complete. The silence folded in again. The old man wiped the counter with his rag, steady, unhurried. He spoke with the calm of someone announcing the weather. 7 seats filled. Balance holds. Marcus's voice cracked in a final whisper. "Please, let me go." The man did not answer. Instead, the neon above the roof buzzed louder, its pink glow spilling across the windows. Diner, diner, diner. Each flicker was a heartbeat. Each heartbeat was a chain. Marcus lowered his eyes to the plate that had appeared before him. A simple meal. Eggs, toast, steaming faintly. He did not reach for it. He only stared. Hours passed. Or minutes. Or years. The storm outside raged on, but its sound was distant, dulled by walls thicker than any building should have. And in the booth by the door, Marcus sat silently, unmoving, eyes fixed on his untouched plate. The bell above the entrance chimed. A new figure stepped in from the rain, dripping water onto the tile. He froze just inside the threshold, scanning the silent room. The six did not move. Marcus did not move. The old man looked up from his counter, his rag folded neatly in his hands. His voice carried across the diner, steady as always. "Take a seat, son." The door clicked shut. The bell fell silent, and the balance waited to begin again. Story 3. The Red Scarf. The dormitory at Street. Lucian's College of Art had never been truly quiet, not even at 3 in the morning. Pipes rattled faintly in the walls, ancient radiators hummed with uneven heat, and somewhere down the hall, someone's Bluetooth speaker bled the faintest echo of music through the plaster. But that night, the usual background noise seemed to fade, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Chloe lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where the glow of the streetlight fractured through her blinds. She was dressed, as always, in gray. Gray sweats, gray t-shirt, hair tied in a loose bun. She had built her identity around neutrality, against the clamor of a school obsessed with display students parading their wildest clothes, dyeing their hair in impossible colors, painting their eyelids like canvases. Chloe had chosen restraint. It was easier that way, she told herself. Perfection required control, not spectacle. Yet when she scrolled through her classmates' photos on her phone, their laughter, their flamboyant gestures, the way entire rooms seemed to orbit their presence, something inside her tightened. Control was not attention. Perfection was not admiration. She longed to be seen. Not in passing, not as a shadow in gray at the edge of the studio, but truly seen, caught in the spotlight of others' eyes. Undeniable, unforgettable. It was that hunger that kept her awake now, restless, staring at the shadows shifting on the ceiling. The sound reached her just after 2, soft at first, barely more than a hush against the floorboards, a slow, deliberate glide of footsteps moving down the hall outside. They were not the clumsy steps of a drunk student returning from a party, nor the hurried patter of someone running to the bathroom. These steps were measured, unhurried, almost reverent. Chloe sat up, heart thudding. A whisper followed the sound, low but clear. The syllables stretched like silk across the stillness. Does anyone want something that makes them stand out? The words bled through the thin walls. She held her breath, straining to listen. A door down the hall opened. Hinges squeaked faintly. Chloe imagined one of the girls poking her head out, sleep-heavy, curious. Silence followed. Then the door clicked shut again. The footsteps resumed, closer this time. Does anyone want something that makes them stand out? Chloe's skin prickled. She padded to her door, bare feet silent on the cold floor. Pressing her ear against the wood, she heard the glide of those measured steps, the whisper threading just beyond. The voice was unmistakably female. Low, steady, not a girl her age, but something older. The kind of voice you wanted to obey before you thought to question it. One by one, the footsteps passed each door. Each time the same question floated, the offer of something rare, irresistible. Chloe's pulse hammered. In her mind, she saw herself in class tomorrow, no longer overlooked. Professors pausing mid-lecture to admire her. Students turning their heads as she walked past. Conversations faltering, eyes following. She saw herself radiant, unforgettable, no longer a shadow. She swallowed hard. The footsteps stopped just outside her door. The whisper came again, slower, coaxing. Does anyone want something that makes them stand out? Chloe closed her eyes. The words dug under her ribs. Her hand hovered over the knob. She did not move. Not yet. She waited, trembling, listening to the silence stretch on the other side. The silence outside Chloe's door stretched so long she thought the footsteps had moved on. Her hand still hovered over the knob, her breath shallow against the wood. She almost convinced herself to retreat, crawl back into bed, pretend she had never heard the whisper at all. But then it came again, softer, closer, as though the voice was speaking through the keyhole itself. Does anyone want something that makes them stand out? The words sank into her like hooks. Her hand twisted the knob before she could stop herself. The door swung open with a groan. The hallway stretched empty, lit only by the faint blue glow of an exit sign at the far end. Shadows pooled at the corners, the plaster walls yellowed by age, and there she was. The woman stood several doors down, her face half veiled by long dark hair that spilled across the front of her white dress. The fabric shimmered faintly in the dim light, swaying as though stirred by a breeze that did not exist in the still dorm air. Her head tilted at the sound of the door, though Chloe could not see her eyes. The woman's voice floated again, this time directed. Do you want it? Chloe's throat tightened. She wanted to ask what it was, to question, to demand explanation, but hunger overrode caution. The word left her lips with a sharp urgency. Yes, I want it. I want something that makes everyone see me. The woman's smile was audible, though her mouth was barely visible. A soft, knowing exhale, like satisfaction fulfilled. Good, she murmured. Then take it. Her hand rose from her side, pale against the gloom. Draped across it was a length of silk, impossibly bright against the washed-out world around her. The red was so pure, so saturated, it seemed to burn Chloe's vision a scarlet that felt more alive than any pigment she had ever seen in her art classes. The woman flicked her wrist. The scarf unfurled, curling through the air like a living flame. It landed across Chloe's threshold, spreading neatly at her feet. Before Chloe could step forward, the woman was gone. Not vanished in a blink, not dissolved into mist, simply absent, as though the hallway had been empty all along. Chloe's breath rushed out. Her hand trembled on the doorknob. She stared down at the silk, radiant even in the dull light. Slowly, reverently, she bent to pick it up. The fabric was impossibly smooth, sliding cool between her fingers. It seemed to mold itself to her touch, eager, pliant. She lifted it, watching the color ripple in folds, deeper than red paint, richer than blood. Her chest rose with a sudden laugh, shaky but ecstatic. The scarf was hers. She swung the door shut behind her, pressing her back against it. The room was silent, the radiator ticking faintly. She hurried to the mirror above her desk. The reflection startled her. She had draped the scarf around her neck without thinking, but the effect was immediate, electric. Against her gray t-shirt, the red blazed. It was as if her entire face had been recast in its glow. Her pale skin looked luminous, her dark eyes deeper. She looked unforgettable. She touched her neck, running her fingers along the silk. Her pulse throbbed beneath, but the fabric cooled it, soothed it, as though it belonged there. Chloe leaned closer to the mirror, grinning at her reflection. For the first time in years, she felt radiant. She imagined walking across campus tomorrow, eyes turning, whispers rising, professors pausing mid-step. She whispered to herself, "No one will be able to ignore me." And her reflection's lips moved with hers, but for a heartbeat, she thought she saw them curve into a wider smile than she had meant. She blinked, startled. The image was her own again. She laughed nervously. "Too much caffeine," she muttered. She slipped into bed, still wearing the scarf. The fabric cooled against her collarbone as she pulled the blanket over herself. She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. And in the quiet, just before sleep took her, she thought she heard the woman's whisper echo once more inside her skull. "Now they will never look away." Chloe woke to light pressing through the blinds. For once, she hadn't needed an alarm. She rolled over, blinking against the haze of morning, and felt the cool slide of silk against her collarbone. The scarf, it was still there, knotted neatly around her neck, its folds perfect despite the restless hours of sleep. She sat up quickly, half afraid it would look different in daylight. But the color was unchanged, vivid, searing, almost impossibly red. She touched it, fingers trembling. The fabric clung, pliant but firm, as though it had grown accustomed to her pulse. She smiled. In the bathroom mirror, she adjusted it. Her hair, plain brown and tied back, seemed suddenly sharper, more deliberate. Her skin glowed paler, more luminous against the scarlet. The scarf remade her. Today, she thought, they'll see me. Her gray sweater and jeans were suddenly enough, transformed by the halo of color at her throat. For the first time, Chloe left her dorm room without second-guessing her outfit. She walked down the hall, head high, scarf fluttering faintly as she moved. The campus was alive with the morning shuffle of students, coffee cups steaming in their hands, canvases tucked under arms, clusters of laughter echoing across the quad. She stepped into their current, her stride deliberate, and just as she'd imagined, heads turned. Dozens of them, eyes locked onto her as she passed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Coffee paused halfway to lips. Footsteps slowed. Chloe's chest tightened with triumph. She felt taller, brighter, undeniable. They couldn't ignore her now. The scarf caught the light like fire, commanding attention. But the longer she walked, the harder it became to smile. Because none of the stares looked admiring. The faces watching her were stiff, pale, mouths frozen half open, eyes wide, not with envy, but with alarm. She caught one girl's gaze, a classmate from design theory. The girl flinched and turned sharply away, nearly dropping her sketchbook. Another boy muttered something under his breath as Chloe passed. His tone hushed and frantic. Whispers rose in her wake. Not giggles, not compliments. Murmurs that darted between students, quick and urgent, as if warning each other. Chloe's hand rose instinctively to the scarf, clutching it tighter. The silk was cool, soothing against her throat. They don't understand, she told herself. They've never seen something so bold, so beautiful. They're stunned. But then she caught her reflection in a passing window. Her heart lurched. The scarf glowed brilliantly. Yes, but the faces behind her in the glass were not simply glancing. They were staring, their eyes hollow, fixed not on the fabric but lower, at her throat. Her steps faltered. She ducked into the nearest building, her shoes scuffing against tile. The whispers followed her inside, soft and insistent, until the door swung shut behind her. The painting studio smelled of turpentine and clay dust. Easels crowded the room, canvases half-finished leaning against the walls. Normally, Chloe felt small here, one shadow among dozens of aspiring artists. Today, Silence rippled across the studio as she entered. Every brush paused, every head lifted. The attention should have thrilled her. Instead, her stomach knotted. Her professor, a lean man with spectacles slipping down his nose, lowered his palate slowly, his eyes fixed on her scarf, but his face contorted with something close to revulsion. "Chloe," his voice cracked. "What happened to your neck?" She froze. "My... what?" Students shifted uneasily, their chairs scraping faintly against the floor. One girl covered her mouth. Another whispered too softly for Chloe to catch the words. Heat rose in her face. She tugged at the scarf defensively, pulling it higher, wrapping it tighter. It's nothing. A scarf. Don't you see? It's beautiful." No one answered. They only watched her with those wide, horrified eyes, as though she had bared something indecent, something grotesque. Her professor's voice lowered. "Chloe, please, take it off." The request stabbed her. Take it off? Give up the only thing that had ever made her radiant? She shook her head violently. "No, I need this. You don't understand. I need them to see me." His hand trembled as he raised it slightly, not in anger but in helplessness. "They do see you." The words lingered in the air, heavy, final. Chloe's pulse roared in her ears. She clutched the scarf so tightly her knuckles whitened. She spun away from their stares, fleeing down the hall. Her reflection flashed in the glass of the doors as she passed, and in those brief glimpses, she thought she saw not silk around her neck, but skin stretched too taut, glossy and red, threaded with hairline cracks that pulsed faintly as if they bled beneath. Her breath caught. She stumbled into the bathroom at the end of the corridor, slamming the door shut behind her. The mirror above the sink waited. Chloe leaned forward, hands braced on porcelain, chest heaving. The scarf gleamed brilliantly in the fluorescent light, rich as blood. She whispered to her reflection, half pleading, half triumphant, "You can't look away now." The mirror gave no comfort, only the faintest ripple in the fabric, where it pressed too close to her skin. Chloe locked the bathroom door behind her. The metal latch scraped loudly, too loud, as though the sound wanted to warn her. She leaned against the sink, staring at her reflection. The scarf gleamed brilliantly, as it had the night before, but under the hard fluorescence, something about it looked wrong. The edges where it touched her skin were not crisp. They blurred, blending into her throat. The silk looked less like fabric and more like flesh, painted too bright. She reached up quickly, clutching the end of the scarf. Her fingers expected the familiar slip of fabric. Instead, they met something softer, warmer, the texture of skin. Her stomach turned. She yanked. Pain seared down her neck, not the sting of silk pulling hair, but the raw agony of tearing something alive. She gasped, stumbling back from the mirror, clutching at the scarf again. She pulled harder this time, frantic, but the red stretched with her skin, refusing to peel away. A scream tore from her throat, strangled halfway by the tightening at her neck. She spun toward the stall door, slammed her shoulder into it, desperate to break through the locked frame. The latch rattled but held. She slammed again, her voice rising in panicked sobs. "No, no, no, get it off, get it off." Her reflection caught her mid-struggle. She froze, staring. The girl in the mirror wasn't fighting fabric. She was clawing at her own neck, nails digging into skin that shimmered red and glossy. Thin cracks split outward from beneath her fingers, and a bead of blood welled, sliding down her collarbone. Her knees buckled. She pressed her palms against the porcelain sink, gagging. "This isn't real," she whispered. "It's just a dream. It's just..." But her body knew better. The throbbing pulse beneath the scarf was hers. The pain where she had pulled was hers. The smell of iron in the air was hers. Slowly, trembling, she lifted the scarf again. There was no edge, no seam. Only her own flesh, red as paint, glossy and smooth, stretched across her throat. The silk had vanished, or worse, it had been absorbed. Her skin was the scarf now. Chloe's breath came shallow, ragged. She stumbled back from the mirror, slamming against the tiled wall. Her hands clawed at the grout, searching for something to hold, something to keep her grounded. But the mirror pulled her eyes again, and what she saw froze her blood. Her reflection smiled, just slightly. The lips curved, subtle but undeniable. Her own mouth had not moved. She clapped a hand to her lips, trembling. Her reflection's smile widened, slow and knowing. The red around its throat gleamed brighter, pulsing like a fresh wound. The whisper returned, curling out of the glass itself. The same voice that had prowled the dorm hall the night before. Now they cannot look away, Chloe screamed, slamming her fist into the mirror. The glass fractured, a spider web of cracks radiating from her knuckles. Her hand bled, scarlet droplets sliding down her wrist, staining the bright scarf of her neck even deeper. The fractured pieces of glass reflected her a dozen times over each Chloe, smiling wider. The red around their throats spreading like fire. Her legs gave out. She slid down the wall to the cold tile, sobbing into her hands. The scarf pulsed with every beat of her heart. Tighter, brighter, impossible to ignore. And outside the bathroom door, faint but rising, she heard voices gathering, students whispering to one another, urgent, horrified. They were talking about her. They were always talking about her now. The whispers outside the bathroom door grew louder. Feet shuffled in the hall, knuckles rapped against the metal. A voice, a girl from her floor, called her name softly, as if coaxing a frightened animal. Chloe, are you all right in there? Chloe pressed her back against the wall, shaking her head even though no one could see. Her pulse thundered, hot against the red band at her throat. The scarf, no. Her skin tightened with each beat, pulling taut like stretched canvas. She couldn't answer them. Not like this. Her eyes dragged back to the mirror, fractured into a dozen shards. Each one held her reflection, but none were the same. In one shard, her neck was still wrapped in silk, smooth and elegant. In another, the flesh split, bleeding bright ribbons that dripped down her chest. In yet another, her entire face was painted red, a mask of cracked skin. She clutched her head, rocking. Stop. Stop showing me. But the mirror did not obey. Her throat burned. She tore at the red, nails clawing, desperate to peel away the thing that bound her. Strips came loose, but they were not fabric. They were her. Her skin peeled in ribbons, curling away from raw muscle. Blood smeared her fingers, but no matter how much she ripped, more red gleamed beneath, seamless and unending. The scarf wasn't on her. It was her. She staggered to her feet, swaying, tears and sweat dripping down her face. In the largest shard of glass, her reflection tilted its head, smiling again. Its lips parted, whispering without sound. They're looking at you. The knock on the door grew louder. More voice now, urgent, fearful. Chloe, open up. Her breath rasped, shallow and fast. She stumbled toward the sink, gripping the porcelain so hard it cracked beneath her nails. She wanted to scream for help, to beg them to come in. But when she opened her mouth, no words came, only a wet choke, as though the scarf had wound itself down into her lungs. She turned, slamming her fists against the door. Her blood smeared across the white paint. Help me. She tried to shout, but the sound emerged, warped, strangled, half swallowed by the red tightening around her. The whispers outside stilled. The students had heard her, but instead of breaking in, instead of rushing to help, the silence stretched, heavy and horrified. She realized they weren't coming in. They were afraid of her. The truth settled in her chest like ice. She wanted their attention, begged for it, and now she had it. Every pair of ears pressed to the door. Every eye wide in the hall. Every mind fixed on the image of Chloe, the girl with the scarf, the girl screaming inside the bathroom. And she understood, with a sick twist of triumph and despair. They would never forget her. Her knees buckled. She slid to the floor, staring at the red bloom across her chest, at the glossy sheen of her arms where the color had spread. It pulsed, alive, fusing, sealing. Her reflection watched her from the broken glass, dozens of Chloes in shards, all smiling now. The whispers inside her skull matched those in the hallway, a chorus layered together. They can't look away. Her vision blurred. The scarf, her skin tightened once more, pulling everything together until her entire body shone with that impossible, radiant red. And somewhere deep inside, past the horror, past the agony, a single thought pulsed. She had what she wanted. They were watching. They would always watch. The bathroom door rattled. A key scraped at the lock. Chloe tried to lift her head, to beg them not to see, not to come in. But her mouth would not open anymore. The red had sealed it into a permanent smile. The last thing she saw before darkness closed her eyes was her reflection in the largest shard of glass. Herself, luminous, scarlet, unforgettable. The door swung wide, and the scream that followed in the hallway carried her name into legend. Story 4. The Elevator Pit. Simon was the last one in the office again. The rest of his team had packed up hours earlier, their chatter fading into the elevators, leaving him with only the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the faint hum of the HVAC. He rubbed his eyes, the spreadsheet on his monitor a blur of numbers that refused to hold still. The building had been new once, sleek and glassy, but now its age showed in every flicker of light, every groan of pipe. The skyscraper had passed its prime. Simon sometimes thought it resented being filled with people at all. He saved his work, shut down the computer, and stood. His chair gave a tired squeal across the linoleum. The office was cavernous in its emptiness. Rows of cubicles stretched under the humming lights. Each desk a small stage abandoned mid-performance papers stacked, mugs half full, personal knickknacks waiting for hands that wouldn't return until morning. The silence pressed heavy against Simon's ears. He checked his watch. Nearly midnight. The thought of walking the 29 flights down the stairwell made his legs ache just imagining it. He'd taken the stairs once during a fire drill. The echoing descent left him lightheaded halfway down. No, the elevator would do. He grabbed his jacket, shrugged it on, and headed for the corridor. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor, too loud in the vast quiet. At the far end, the elevator doors waited, stainless steel dulled by fingerprints and scratches. The call button was smeared with something darker, the faint residue of years of hands. Simon pressed it. The light flared reluctantly, like an eye opening after too little sleep. A low groan answered from the shaft. The cables rattled above, heavy metal dragged against its will. The numbers over the door blinked, sluggishly. 22, 21, 20. Each digit seemed to hesitate before giving way to the next. Simon shoved his hands into his pockets, waiting. The silence of the building seemed to lean closer. He thought he heard the faintest thrum beneath the marble, as if the tower itself had a heartbeat. At last, the doors peeled open. The light inside flickered, yellowed, tired. Simon stepped in. The doors closed behind him with a sigh, shutting out the corridor. The panel of buttons glowed faintly, rows of squares labeled from the rooftop level down to the basement. His thumb hovered over B. He wanted to check his car in the underground garage before heading home. He'd left it parked in one of the darker corners, where the cameras didn't quite reach. But when he pressed the button, nothing happened. He frowned, pushed harder. The plastic depressed halfway, then caught, stuck. He pulled his hand back, wiping sweat onto his jacket. Tried again. Harder. The button resisted like a tooth wedged in a rotten gum. He let out a thin laugh. Of course, always the basement. He tried another button lobby. That one worked, lighting up in a faint, jaundiced glow. He exhaled. At least he could get down. From there, maybe take the stairs to the garage. The elevator jolted. His stomach lurched. The motion wasn't the smooth descent he expected. It was more like the floor had shifted beneath him, as if the elevator had been picked up and set on a slope. The lights flickered. The hum of the motor groaned low, almost organic. Simon pressed the lobby button again. Then another, then another. The plastic squares clicked under his fingers, but the panel didn't light. The only glow came from the basement button, faint, irregular, pulsing as though something behind it was trying to breathe. Simon stepped back. The air felt warmer suddenly, humid against his skin. The cables above strained, groaned. For a moment, the walls themselves seemed to flex. Simon pressed the emergency stop. No response. He jabbed the alarm. Silence. The elevator shuddered again, heavier this time, like a throat swallowing. Simon's breath caught. He stared at the panel, the stuck basement button glimmering faintly, as though mocking him. And then the lights cut out. The dark held for only a few breaths. Then, with a reluctant hum, the lights returned. They were no longer the pale, fluorescent glow Simon had known, but a dim, reddish hue pulsing softly, like the heartbeat of something hidden behind the walls. The air had changed with it. It was thicker now, warm and humid, carrying the faint tang of iron and salt. Condensation dripped lazily down the mirrored panels, blurring his reflection into ghostly smears. Simon turned toward the control panel, and his stomach twisted. The neat, Numbered squares had disappeared. In their place bulged shapes that looked more like knots of flesh than plastic. They protruded slightly from the wall, slick, rounded, each etched with words that glistened as if freshly inscribed. He read them slowly, his mouth dry. Fresh meat, tendon, marrow, spinal cord. The syllables felt wrong in his head, like things you should never find inside a building. He stepped back, heart racing, his shoulders pressing into the wall. For a wild moment, he thought about pressing one anyway, just to test, just to make the car move again. But his stomach clenched at the idea. The thought of touching them made him nauseous, as if he might feel them twitch beneath his hand. The elevator lurched before he could decide. The floor dropped sharply, and Simon staggered, clutching the rail. His knees buckled as the sensation of free fall grabbed his stomach and held it there. Above, the shaft did not sound like cables or gears. Instead, a grinding rumble echoed down, low and wet, almost like teeth working through gristle. Then came another sound, deeper still, a slow contraction. A swallow. Simon pressed the alarm button in panic. Nothing answered. He hammered it with his palm, but the noise that came back wasn't a buzz or bell. It was a hollow thud, like a knuckle knocking on bone. The display above the door flickered. For a moment he saw the familiar digital font trying to form numbers B1, B2, B3, but the shapes dissolved, smeared into new words that pulsed in rhythm with the red light. Ingestion, chewing, digestion. The elevator shuddered again, dropping faster, the air around him rushing hot against his face. The walls began to tremble, the metal bowing inwards with each jolt. He pressed his hand against the surface and jerked back in horror. It was no longer cold steel. It gave slightly under his touch, soft, pliant, like the skin of something alive. His breathing quickened, shallow, ragged. The humidity thickened until each gasp tasted faintly sour, the acrid smell of bile filling his throat. Sweat streamed down his face, but the heat clung heavier than any summer day. The grinding noise above grew louder. He could almost picture it, molars the size of girders crushing down, tearing through beams, chewing the elevator itself like cartilage. Each impact rattled the cage around him. The panel flickered, and one by one the grotesque buttons dimmed until only a single phrase glowed in the red gloom. Now digesting, Simon dropped to his knees as the car bucked violently. The floor no longer felt like tile under his palms. It was damp, uneven, the texture of a tongue pressed flat. The vibrations from above rolled down through him, a quiver of muscle contractions, pulling him deeper, deeper. The elevator was not a machine anymore. It hadn't been since he pressed for the basement. It was a throat, and he was already halfway swallowed. The descent no longer felt like motion, but like being dragged, pulled down by something far larger than himself. Simon clung to the rail, though even the rail had changed. It was slick, warm, bending slightly beneath his grip. He could not tell if it was coated with condensation, or if the thing itself was sweating. The air pressed heavier with every second. It was hot, wet, and sour, thick enough that each breath scraped his throat. His lungs ached as though he were breathing steam laced with acid. The fluorescent hum above had become irregular, flickering with each contraction that rolled through the shaft. And then came the sound, the chewing. It started faint, a grinding of stone on stone. But as the elevator sank, it deepened, layered with wetness, the snap and tear of sinew stretched and broken. The sound grew closer until it was all around him, vibrating through the walls, echoing inside his ribs. Each crunch rattled the floor beneath him. Each swallow shook the walls inward. Simon pressed his back to the corner, shaking his head. It isn't real. It isn't real. But his voice sounded swallowed before it left his lips. The heat smothered his words. He risked a glance at the display above the door. The screen was gone, or perhaps it had never been a screen at all. In its place stretched a membrane, translucent, quivering with light behind it. Strange words bloomed and faded across its surface, not in ink or pixels, but as though written in veins, now chewing, now softening, now breaking down. The floor trembled. Simon stumbled forward, catching himself against the wall. To his horror, the panel beneath his palms flexed like muscle, then tightened, pushing him away. He staggered, landing hard on the damp floor. The walls began to bow inward. Slowly, inexorably, they curved toward him, pressing the space smaller. The ceiling lowered. The floor rose, as if the whole chamber were inhaling. He clawed at the seams of the door. His nails scraped, drawing up not sparks but a thick, stringy fluid. His stomach turned at the smell, sour, acrid, the stench of digestion. The walls pressed closer. Moisture ran in rivulets, dripping onto his shoulders, his hair searing faintly against his skin. He wiped at his cheek and hissed as his fingers came away red. It wasn't condensation, it was acid. The chewing above grew frantic. He could hear pieces of the building itself being broken apart, beams torn like bones, floors snapped like brittle crackers. A great swallow followed, low and final, and the elevator dropped again, deeper into the gullet of the thing. Simon screamed. The sound barely carried. The air was too heavy, the walls too close. His scream rebounded only inches before it was muffled, as if swallowed too. He tried to brace himself between the narrowing walls, pressing his arms out wide. The surfaces quivered beneath his palms, resisting like thick muscle. A vibration passed through them, rhythmic and wet, almost like laughter. The floor shifted under him, tilting, slick. He fell to his knees. Acid burned through the fabric of his trousers. The smell of scorched cloth filled the chamber. He yelped and rolled, clutching his legs, but there was nowhere dry to retreat to. Every surface wept with moisture. His breath came shallow, fast. His lips cracked, his eyes burned. The chamber pulsed again, the ceiling dropping lower until he had to hunch. The walls brushed his shoulders. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He pressed his forehead to the slick surface of the door, whispering, "Please, please, let me out." For a moment the contraction eased. The chewing above slowed. Silence hovered like a held breath. Then the membrane above the door pulsed once more. New words swam into being. Faint at first, then bolder. Now grinding, now crushing, now absorbing. The walls surged inward. The floor pitched upward. Simon cried out as his ribs compressed, a sharp pain stabbing deep. He pushed with all his strength, but his palms slipped, finding no grip. His scream broke into sobs. "I don't want to die in here." But some part of him understood he was no longer inside an elevator, or even a building. He was inside a stomach, and the stomach had only one purpose. The chamber squeezed tighter, the acid hissing louder as it dripped. The chewing above resumed, faster now, eager, final. Simon gasped, every breath shorter than the last. His vision blurred, spotted black. The heat smothered him. The walls pressed closer still, forcing his arms in, forcing his knees up, curling him into a ball. The last thing he heard before the lights flickered out again was the wet, gluttonous sound of swallowing. And then, the darkness closed in like teeth. The chamber convulsed, folding inward with a force that knocked Simon flat. His palms slapped against the floor, but the floor was no longer flat metal. It was ridged, uneven, trembling with waves of motion. Warm liquid seeped up through seams that weren't seams at all, but folds of flesh. The lights overhead burst with a sharp crack, showering sparks that hissed instantly in the wet air. What remained was a faint, red bioluminescence, as though the walls themselves had begun to glow. Simon staggered upright, gagging, and pressed himself against the door. But the door was no longer metal. It had softened into something rubbery, veined with darker lines, twitching faintly at his touch. He pounded his fists against it, screaming hoarsely, but the sound came back to him muffled, as if absorbed. His throat ached, each shout searing against the sour heat. And then the elevator cracked. Not a clean split of steel and bolts, but a tearing, a rending of tissue. The walls peeled back in long, wet strips. Steam poured in, burning his eyes, his skin. Simon stumbled, hands flying up to cover his face. When he dared to lower them, he saw what lay beyond. A cavern, vast, heaving, alive. The walls were slick folds of flesh, glistening with acid that dripped in fat rivulets into pools below. The air shimmered with heat, heavy and sour. Every surface quivered with motion, contracting, pulsing, working ceaselessly. The elevator car, what remained of it, dangled like cartilage caught in a throat. Strips of metal groaned as they bent inward, warping under pressure. Simon clutched the frame of the doorway, retching at the sight. Bone fragments jutted from the pools, yellow-white and half dissolved. Strands of hair clung to the folds like weeds in a swamp. The sour air hissed against his skin, burning faintly wherever it touched. A thunderous sound rolled from above the chew, the grind, echoing through the cavern. It shook droplets loose, sizzling as they fell. The flesh around him quivered in response, and the floor bucked violently. He lost his grip and fell forward. His body struck a slick surface, and his arms sank elbow deep in the slime. He flailed, screaming, the sound raw and broken, but his fingers found nothing solid. The surface flexed, then pushed back, tossing him aside like a swallowed morsel. He rolled onto a ridge, gasping, clothes clinging to his skin. The acid burned faintly through the fabric. His mind reeled, refusing to accept it, yet his senses gave him no escape. He was inside something. Not a machine, not a building, a body. The cavern tightened, a slow, rolling contraction. He slid helplessly along the slope of flesh, toward the pools below. The hiss of acid grew louder. He dug his fingers into the folds, nails tearing, but the tissue was too slick, too strong. He screamed again, voice breaking. "Please, somebody, help me." His cry echoed once, twice, then dissolved, as though the chamber itself had swallowed the sound. Above, the membrane that had once displayed numbers flickered faintly. The words scrawled across it now glowed brighter, veins of light spelling the same phrase over and over. "Now digesting, now digesting, now digesting." Simon sobbed, thrashing against the inevitable pull. His shoes slipped, his palms burned. Acid stung his eyes until the world blurred into red haze. The elevator car collapsed behind him with a final shriek, crumpling like tin, swallowed by the contracting walls. The sound was almost like a belch, a release of air that rattled the chamber. Simon turned back just in time to see the last shred of metal dissolve into the folds. No evidence of an elevator remained. Only flesh, only stomach. The cavern pulsed again. A gush of fluid surged from the walls, splattering across him. It burned instantly, tearing screams from his throat. He clawed at his skin, at his shirt, but the fabric melted under his grip. The chewing above intensified, shaking loose another torrent of acid. The pools below boiled, releasing foul steam that scalded his lungs. Simon fell to his knees, choking, body racked with shudders. Everywhere around him, bones shifted, dissolving, snapping under invisible pressure. Skulls bobbed faintly in the pools before cracking apart. Long, warped beams of metal office chairs, rebar, fragments of desks were crushed flat, indistinguishable from the skeletons they mingled with. Simon crawled blindly, desperate for any escape, but the folds of flesh shifted to meet him, hurting him downward. Each contraction dragged him closer to the churning pit. He screamed until his throat gave out, until the sound reduced to a rasp. The chamber paid him no mind. It was only doing what it was made to do. The building had never been just steel and glass. It had always been hungry, and Simon was already inside its stomach. The heat pressed tighter with each breath. Simon could no longer tell if he was breathing air or acid mist. Every gasp seared his throat raw. Every blink stung as tears boiled on his cheeks. The chamber rolled again, a massive contraction, and he slid helplessly down the slick slope toward the center pool. Bones cracked beneath the surface, releasing muffled pops. Bubbles rose, fat and yellow, bursting with the stench of rot. The surface hissed as though eager for him, as though welcoming a final meal. Simon clawed at the folds, fingers digging into flesh that quivered but would not yield. His nails bent, tore, broke, his palms smeared with blood and acid until he could no longer tell which was his and which belonged to the cavern. He screamed, but the scream was short-lived. The air thickened around him, swallowing sound before it could carry. The chamber seemed to savor it, drawing his voice in, silencing him more completely than any gag. The pool received him at last. His body plunged into the hot slurry, the liquid clinging, burning, wrapping him like a second skin. He kicked wildly, but the acid clutched tighter with every movement. He tried to force his head above the surface, but each time he broke through, another gush poured down, pushing him under. His throat convulsed, choking on the bitter fluid. He gagged, coughed, tried to scream again. Nothing emerged but bubbles. His lungs ached, his chest heaved. His vision narrowed to darkness around the edges. Above, the grinding returned, louder than before. The entire cavern shook as something vast and unseen chewed slowly, steadily, like jaws savoring the last of a meal. Simon's final cry dissolved into a thin, broken rasp. He reached upward, arms trembling, fingers stretching toward a ceiling that no longer existed. His mouth opened, but no sound came. And then, silence. The folds of the cavern rippled once, contracting in unison. A deep, wet gulp rolled through the space. The pool surged, swallowing everything whole. The chamber stilled. Only the hiss of acid remained, eating through the remnants of metal and bone. A belch echoed from somewhere above, a long, resonant rumble that shook dust from unseen rafters. And then, faintly, impossibly, the panel above the place where the elevator door had once been flickered to life. Not words of horror now. Not grotesque anatomy. Just a single, familiar letter. B. The basement. The light glowed steady, as if nothing had happened at all. Far above, in the lobby of the skyscraper, the elevator doors dinged politely. The display lit the same letter. B. Anyone waiting would see only the indicator. Nothing more. The shaft hummed softly, like a machine at rest, like any other elevator. No trace of Simon remained. No trace of screams, or heat, or hunger. Only the building, vast and silent, waiting for the next passenger to press the wrong button. Story 5. The choice of the Guardian. The campsite had gone quiet hours ago. Most of the hikers who shared the trail with Jessica had packed up before sundown, chasing the safety of paved roads and lit cabins. She had chosen to stay. Solitude was the point. To walk alone, to cook over a single flame, to fall asleep beneath the wash of stars without anyone else's breath intruding on the night. But solitude had teeth. By midnight, the air had cooled to a damp chill. The wind pushed through the pines in long, uneven sighs. Insects filled the pauses with their endless rhythm, 1,000 tiny fiddles bowing in unison. The canvas of Jessica's tent shifted with every breeze, its nylon groaning like an old door. She lay awake inside, her sleeping bag pulled to her chin, waiting for her body to surrender to rest. It didn't. Her stomach pressed uncomfortably, a reminder of the lukewarm beans she had eaten hours before. She swore softly to herself and unzipped the tent. The campground bathroom was not close. She had passed it earlier that day, a squat cinder block building at the edge of the lot, half swallowed by brush. It had been built decades ago, when the park had fewer visitors, and it showed its age in cracks along the foundation, paint peeled from the doors, and the smell that drifted even in daylight. Jessica tugged on her boots, shoved her flashlight into her pocket, and started down the gravel path. The world outside was darker than she expected. The moon was thin, the trees crowding, their branches knitting over the trail like ribs. Her beam cut through in narrow slices, but everything beyond it remained thick with shadow. She walked quickly, crunching gravel underfoot, trying not to imagine eyes glittering just out of reach. Her breath puffed visibly in the cold. When the wind gusted, she thought she heard voices hidden in it, not words, exactly, but tones that resembled them. The bathroom appeared at last, hunched low, its doorway sagging under a crooked light that flickered every few seconds. The windows had been boarded long ago. Jessica wrinkled her nose as she approached. Even from outside, the place reeked of mildew and something sharper, something like wet stone and rot. She told herself it was fine, primitive, but fine. She had chosen this park for its quiet. Quiet didn't come with convenience. The heavy door groaned as she pushed it open. The smell hit harder inside damp concrete, rust, and waste. The single bulb overhead buzzed faintly, painting the stalls in a weak yellow. Shadows clung to the corners, too deep for such a small room. Jessica entered the far stall, trying not to breathe too deeply. The door creaked shut behind her, its latch loose. She sat, tugging her jacket tighter against the chill. Silence swelled. The insects outside were muffled. The wind dimmed. All that remained was the drip of water somewhere in the pipes, irregular, echoing off the concrete. And then, a voice, low, rasping, close. It came from just beneath the stall door, as though someone crouched outside on the floor. "There are two rolls," it whispered. "Black or white?" Jessica froze. Her pulse stumbled, then quickened. She glanced down, heart pounding, but saw only the thin gap beneath the door. Darkness pressed close to it, too dark to be ordinary shadow. The voice came again, steady, coaxing. Choose. Black or white? Jessica's mouth went dry. She gripped the edge of the toilet seat, afraid to look again, afraid not to. Jessica didn't breathe. She sat perfectly still, as if the smallest movement might draw the thing on the other side closer. Her eyes darted downward again, despite herself, tracing the thin strip of shadow beneath the stall door. Something shifted there. Not a hand, not a body, but a kind of darkness that pulsed faintly, as if the air itself had grown thicker. There are two rolls, the voice rasped again, scraping like sandpaper through the silence. Black or white? Her mouth worked uselessly. Finally, she whispered, "What are you talking about?" The voice gave no explanation. Only the same words, softer this time, each syllable stretching like cloth pulled tight. Choose, black or white? Jessica's skin prickled. She forced herself to look to her left, where the metal holder clung crookedly to the stall wall. Two rolls. She hadn't noticed them when she sat down, but they were there now. One was black, not gray, not patterned, but as dark and matte as charcoal, each sheet dense, heavy-looking, as though it had been carved rather than spun. Beside it, the other was pristine white, glowing faintly under the sickly bulb, as if it were lit from within. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't possible. No one stocked bathrooms with black toilet paper. She swallowed, throat dry. "Why?" she whispered. No answer came. Only the sound of breath seeping under the door, harsh and damp. "Choose," the voice repeated. Jessica gripped her knees, nails biting through fabric. "What happens if I don't?" The silence stretched long enough that she thought the question had been ignored. Then, slowly, the reply, "You already Saturday. You cannot leave until you choose." Her chest tightened. She thought about throwing open the stall door, bolting into the night, but some instinct rooted her in place. She knew without knowing how that the door wouldn't open until she answered. Her eyes drifted back to the rolls. The black one seemed to drink the light, its surface absorbing every flicker of the bulb. The white one gleamed too brightly, almost garish in its purity. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "What do they mean?" she demanded. Louder now, a tremor in her voice. The breath rasped again, dragging across her skin like claws. The words came measured, final. "White is truth. 3 days. Oppose it. Black is lies. 7 days." Jessica blinked, confusion swirling with dread. Days. Days of what? The voice did not answer. 3 days until what? 7 days of what? She pressed, her tone rising, desperate, but the silence that followed was absolute. Even the drip in the pipes had stopped. Her eyes burned. She wanted to scream, to demand the rules, but something in her told her there would be no more answers. The choice was all that mattered. Her hand lifted without permission, trembling in the stale air. She hovered between the two rolls, her breath shallow, her mind racing. Black was heavy, ominous. Lies. 7 days. White was pure, sterile. Truth. 3 days. She thought of the woods outside, the thin tent fabric between her and the night, the long drive home tomorrow. She thought of her boyfriend, who had promised to meet her after her trip. He hadn't answered her last text, but she'd brushed it off. Her fingers curled toward the white roll. "White," she whispered hoarsely. "I choose white." The air shifted, colder, sharper, as though the word itself carried weight. For the first time, the voice changed. It lowered into something deeper, more guttural, and yet clearer than before. "White. Truth. 3 days." The shadow beneath the door recoiled, pulling back like mist sucked through a crack. The sound of breathing vanished. Jessica sat frozen, staring at the empty space, her chest heaving. She listened, waiting for footsteps, for the groan of the door. Nothing, only the buzzing bulb, the faint chirp of crickets returning outside. Her hand touched the roll of white paper. It felt ordinary, soft, warm from the humid air. She pulled a single sheet free, and the sound of tearing echoed louder than it should have, a rip that reverberated through the concrete walls. Jessica stuffed it quickly into the toilet, flushed, and stood on unsteady legs. She unlocked the stall door with shaking hands. The bathroom was empty. She stepped out into the night air, gulping it as if she'd been underwater. The wind rustled the trees. The insects sang. The world was normal again. Yet when she turned back, The bathroom door swung slowly shut behind her on its own, sealing the darkness inside. Jessica hurried down the gravel path, her boots crunching louder than before. Every few steps she turned, half expecting to see someone trailing her, but the path behind lay empty, swallowed by shadow. The tent came into view at last, a small gray dome hunched beneath the trees. Relief washed through her, thin but welcome. She slipped inside, zipped the flap, and sat hard against her sleeping bag, arms wrapped tight around her knees. It had just been a trick, she told herself, a strange hallucination. Maybe she was tired, dehydrated, more shaken by the loneliness than she wanted to admit. There hadn't been a voice. There hadn't been rolls of paper. It was stress and darkness, nothing more. And yet, her fingers touched her pocket, brushing the faint square of tissue she'd taken without realizing. She pulled it free. White, perfect, untouched, but it wasn't quite the same as before. The paper no longer felt soft. It was stiff, almost brittle, like something meant for writing rather than use. She crumpled it and shoved it deeper into her pack, trying not to think about it. Her phone blinked in the corner of the tent, its screen lighting the fabric faintly. She hadn't expected service this far into the park, but the signal bar gleamed stronger than ever. Jessica swiped it open. A new notification glowed at the top. A message from Aaron. Her chest lifted. She hadn't heard from him in days, and worry had gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. She tapped quickly. I'll meet you at the trailhead in 3 days. Don't forget, I miss you. The words were simple, but they made her throat tighten. He had remembered. He was coming. Relief spilled through her like cool water, but as she stared, the message blinked once. The text wavered, letters rearranging like insects crawling across the screen. Then, just as suddenly, the thread went blank. Empty. Jessica sat frozen, thumb hovering. She refreshed the page, refreshed again. Nothing. No message. The timestamp had vanished. She whispered, "No," and then the message reappeared. The same words, same time. Perfect, as though it had never gone. She dropped the phone onto her bag, pressing her palms over her eyes. The air inside the tent felt too close, too heavy. She unzipped the flap a few inches for air, but the wind that slid through was wrong. It whispered as it passed, brushing the canvas with a sound too much like a word. 3 days. Jessica stiffened. Her gaze flicked to the dark trees outside. Nothing moved there, but the sound lingered, winding between the branches. She closed the flap quickly, sealing herself in. Her phone vibrated again. She snatched it up, heart pounding. Another message. Same number. Same sender. Don't forget. 3 days. This time the words didn't vanish. They stayed, pulsing faintly, the screen refusing to dim. Jessica set the phone face down and crawled into her sleeping bag. Her body trembled with cold despite the heavy fabric. She shut her eyes tight, willing herself to sleep, to let exhaustion pull her under. But sleep didn't come. Every time she drifted, the sound of breathing rose in her ears. Not hers, not close, but near enough. Outside the tent, moving around it, slow, dragging, circling. She clutched the zipper of her bag, heart hammering, and kept her eyes closed. If she didn't move, if she didn't acknowledge it, maybe it would pass. Minutes stretched. The breathing faded, swallowed by the crickets. She opened her eyes at last, just to prove she was safe. Her phone screen glowed faintly beside her. The message thread had changed. The latest text now read, "Truth in 3 days." And beneath it, in smaller script she had never seen her phone use before, a line of words she did not want to read but could not ignore. The choice has been made. Jessica lay trembling in the dark, the white paper crumpled in her pack like a buried seed, waiting to bloom. The days bled together in a haze of dread. Jessica had hiked, had cooked, had forced herself through the motions of camping, but none of it felt real. The white roll weighed on her mind like a hidden stone, and every time she unzipped her pack, she thought she could hear it shifting faintly, as though alive. Her phone never stopped chiming. Every few hours, another message from Aaron. 3 days. Don't forget. I'll meet you at the trailhead. Always the same words. Always appearing, vanishing, then reappearing. The signal bar glowed full, though she had wandered into valleys where no map claimed coverage. The nights were worse. The breathing outside the tent returned, sometimes circling, sometimes pressing close enough to rattle the canvas. She had stopped unzipping the flap. She lay still, silent, waiting, heart pounding until exhaustion forced her into restless dreams, where voices whispered from the ground beneath her. And then, on the morning of the third day, the forest fell silent. The crickets, the birds, even the wind gone. The air held still, heavy, as though the world were waiting. Jessica sat outside her tent, her breakfast untouched, eyes on the phone she dared not pick up. The screen lit itself, a new notification. But this one was different. It wasn't from Erin. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Her thumb trembled as she swiped it open. Missing person alert. Erin R. Last seen at Pine Hollow Trail 3 days ago. Her breath stopped. She stared at the words until her vision blurred. She read them again, slower, but they remained the same. A cold wave broke over her, drowning her chest. 3 days ago, the same day she had sat in the stall, the same moment she had whispered, "White." Her hands shook so violently she dropped the phone. It landed against her pack, and something inside shifted. Jessica froze. She reached for the zipper, dreading what she already knew. Slowly, she opened the pack. The crumpled square of white paper lay on top, but it was no longer paper. It had flattened into a rectangle, stiff and cold. Ink covered its surface. She lifted it with numb fingers. The headline glared at her in bold black letters. Obituary. Her eyes dragged downward, against her will, to the name printed below. Aroneri. Her stomach heaved. She dropped the slip as if it burned, but it fluttered to the ground gently, as though weightless. The letters shimmered faintly in the pale sunlight. Impossible, undeniable. She staggered back, hands gripping her head, breath breaking into sobs. She wanted to scream, to tear the page, to burn it, but something in her told her it would change nothing. The Guardian had spoken. She had chosen white. Truth. 3 days. And the truth had been delivered. Her phone vibrated again. She forced herself to look. The thread with Erin glowed on the screen, but the last message was no longer his. It was hers. Words she had never typed stared back at her. I accept. The forest seemed to lean closer, its silence absolute. Jessica clutched the phone to her chest and sank to her knees beside the obituary. The paper stared up at her, stark, final, waiting for her to understand. And she did. The truth was never about her. It was about him. The obituary lay in the dirt like a pale seed, its edges untouched by the breeze. No matter how Jessica stared at it, she could not will the letters to rearrange themselves. They remained as sharp and final as chisel marks on stone. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream, but her body refused. She sat there in the silence of the woods, the paper at her knees, the phone buzzing weakly against her palm. On the screen, Erin's name still hovered at the top of the thread, but the words beneath no longer belonged to him. They belonged to her. I accept. Her thumb shook as she scrolled, searching desperately for the earlier texts, but each one blurred and dissolved, replaced with the same phrase, line after line. I accept. I accept. I accept. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Scrolling endlessly down, as though she had been whispering it for days. Jessica dropped the phone, chest heaving. Her mind clawed backward, to the stall, to the voice under the door, to the rolls of paper gleaming side by side, black or white, lies or truth. 7 days or 3. She had chosen without understanding, and the world had obeyed. And now she knew. The Guardian's bargain was not a riddle to amuse or frighten. It was a contract sealed in choice. She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing. I didn't mean it. I didn't know. But the trees did not answer. The earth did not shift. The silence was total. A silence that knew, that judged, that remembered. When she lowered her hands, the obituary was gone. Her heart lurched. She scrambled forward, clawing at the dirt, but there was nothing left except the imprint of the paper where it had lain. Her pack lay open beside her. The white roll rested on top again, as though it had never been touched, pristine, glowing faintly in the shadow. Jessica's breath caught. Slowly, she reached for it. Her fingers brushed its surface. It was cool, too cool. Not paper at all, but something heavier, smoother, like marble. A whisper coiled through the trees. Choose again. Her vision swam. She shoved the roll deep into the pack, zipped it shut, and pressed her fists against it as if she could crush it out of existence. But the weight of it pressed back. Steady, patient. Her phone vibrated once more. She didn't want to look. She knew what it would say. Still, she lifted it with trembling hands. A new message gleamed at the top. Guardian awaits. Black or white. You carry the rolls now. The phone slipped from her grip. Her body trembled with the realization. It hadn't been about her choice alone. The Guardian had chosen her as well. She had carried out the contract. She had spoken the word that marked Aaron's fate, and now the rolls belonged to her. Jessica curled onto her side, clutching her knees to her chest. Her breaths came shallow, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. She wanted to believe that if she lay still, if she stayed silent, the Guardian might forget her. But deep down, she knew it would never forget, and sooner or later, someone else would sit in a stall, in some forgotten corner of the world, and hear the rasp beneath the door. When they looked down, they would not find rolls waiting for them. She would be the one to pass them. The silence pressed close, as heavy as the night air. The forest seemed to lean inward, waiting. Jessica shut her eyes, praying for sleep, but the last thought that echoed through her mind was not her own. White is truth, black is lies. You will guard them now, and somewhere, in the dark folds of the woods, a voice too low to be human whispered back, choose. Story 6, the 14th floor. Leo had always loved tall buildings. As a photographer, he sought them out: glass towers, brutalist slabs, Art Deco peaks that cut the skyline into sharp geometry. There was something comforting about their solidity, their arrogant permanence. Cities rose and fell, but concrete endured. So when he signed the lease for a new apartment, he felt a little thrill knowing it sat near the top of one of the tallest residential towers downtown. The Crest, it was called. A sleek, high-end condominium lined with mirrored windows that caught the sun like blades. His unit was listed on the 13th floor, though everyone from the realtor to the security guard called it 12+1 with a nervous laugh. The number 13 didn't appear on the elevator panel. It jumped from 12 to 14, as if superstition could erase stone and steel. But the lease said 13. Apartment 1307, tucked into the far corner of the hall, the last door before the building's concrete spine. The apartment itself was immaculate: white walls, clean angles, and a window view that swallowed the city whole. Leo filled it with cameras, tripods, light stands. He liked to photograph the way the skyline shifted at dusk, the way the glass towers blushed pink before fading to black. Still, even on that first night, something felt off. The ceiling creaked. It was subtle, at first. A faint scuff, a muffled thud, the kind of sound you might expect from neighbors above. Only there were no neighbors above. His was the top floor, at least. Officially. Leo told himself it was nothing. Buildings made noise. Pipes groaned. Steel expanded. Air ducts whispered. He shut his blinds and focused on editing the day's work, bathing the room in the cold glow of his monitor. But the sound returned the next night. Louder. A dragging, metallic scrape, as though something heavy was being hauled across concrete, followed by a sudden bang, sharp enough to rattle the glass in his window. Leo jolted upright. He waited, holding his breath. The sound faded into silence, leaving only the hum of his refrigerator. He laughed nervously to himself. Thin walls, maybe. But the ceiling didn't have thin walls. Above it was supposed to be nothing. A roof. Sky. By the third night, he couldn't ignore it. The noises came like clockwork after midnight, a series of dull impacts, followed by hurried footsteps. Sometimes he swore he heard breathing, deep and labored, directly above his bed. He set up a camera on a tripod, lens pointed at the ceiling, as if catching the sound in an image might explain it. But the footage showed only his empty ceiling fan spinning slowly in the dark. Curiosity itched at him until it became unbearable. On the fourth night, unable to sleep, he left his apartment and wandered the hall. The corridor was plush, carpeted, lined with identical doors. Recessed lights glowed warm against beige walls. He paced it once, then again, listening for some flaw in the architecture, some vent or duct that could explain the sound. Near the very end, past his own door, he noticed something he hadn't before. The wallpaper ended abruptly at a blank patch of concrete. There, set flush against the wall, was a narrow steel door. No number, no handle, just a rectangular outline, the paint around it faintly scuffed, as though something heavy had brushed against it many times. Leo crouched, running his fingers along the seam. Cold, smooth, out of place in a hallway designed to hide its utilities, and there barely visible a sliver of dark space where the door didn't quite meet the frame. From within came a draft of air, colder than the hallway, carrying the faint scent of rust. Leo straightened slowly, heart beating faster. Something was behind that door, something the building wanted hidden. Leo stood in front of the metal panel longer than he intended. The corridor was silent, the kind of silence that pressed at the skin, demanding to be broken. He told himself it was a maintenance hatch, a janitor's shortcut, a locked storage closet. But the air that seeped through the seam smelled wrong, colder, older, metallic, the smell of rust and something else, faintly sweet, like blood left too long in the open. He pressed against the edge. To his surprise, the steel gave slightly, bending inward, with a reluctant creak. There was no handle, no lock he could see, just pressure. He pushed harder. The panel groaned and swung inward, scraping the carpet, revealing a stairwell. It was narrow, concrete walls rising up into shadow. The steps were steep, unlit, lined with a handrail that felt damp when he touched it. The air was colder here, heavy, carrying the scent he'd noticed before. Rust, dust, and beneath that, something acrid, like dried rot. Leo's throat tightened. Every instinct told him to close the door and forget he'd ever found it. But the nights of metallic thuds and dragging sounds echoed in his memory. He couldn't shake the feeling that this stairwell was their source. Camera bag slung across his shoulder. He stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him with a metallic clang. He froze. The faintest glow from the hallway vanished, leaving only black. His hand shot out, fumbling along the wall. Smooth concrete, then cold metal. He found the light switch. Nothing. He cursed under his breath, dug out the small flashlight he always carried in his bag, and flicked it on. The beam cut a thin tunnel through the dark, illuminating cracked steps, and the slick sheen of condensation crawling down the wall. He began to climb. Each step groaned under his weight, as though the concrete itself disapproved. The handrail pulsed with cold, moisture seeping into his palm. He wiped it on his jeans, but the dampness lingered. Sticky. Halfway up, he paused, breath misting in the beam of his light. A sound echoed above him, not footsteps exactly. More like something dragging. The scrape of metal against stone, slow, deliberate, moving just beyond reach. Leo lifted his flashlight higher, but the beam caught only the next turn of the stairs. Then nothing. He swallowed, throat dry, and kept climbing. At the top, the stairwell ended in a single steel door. Unlike the hidden panel downstairs, this one had a handle, a heavy iron bar smeared with rust. Across its surface stretched a long gouge, deep and violent, as though someone had raked a blade down its length. Leo raised his flashlight. The beam trembled with his hand. For a moment, he considered leaving. Just walking back down, closing the panel, pretending none of this existed. But the ceiling thuds came back to him. The dragging, the unexplained noises that had haunted him since moving in. If he left now, he would never sleep. He set the flashlight between his teeth, gripped the iron bar, and pulled. The door resisted, then shrieked open, hinges screaming. His light spilled across the floor beyond. A room stretched out, a mirror of his own apartment's layout, but wrong. The furniture was gone, the walls bare. Every surface was coated in a dark layer, thick and brittle. He stepped closer, aiming the light. It wasn't dust. It was blood, dried, cracked, flaking in sheets that clung to the walls and floor. The air smelled coppery, choking. His boots crunched as he stepped forward, each movement dislodging tiny fragments that floated like black snow. Leo's stomach turned, bile rising in his throat. He forced it down. He needed to know. The beam caught the far wall. Words sprawled across it in jagged lines, written in the same dark substance. Dozens of handprints smeared around them, as though clawing for release. We were locked inside the 14th floor. The sentence repeated in overlapping strokes, scrawled by many hands, over and over, until the words drowned themselves in layers of desperation. Leo's breath caught. A noise stirred behind him, soft, steady. Footsteps. He spun, light swinging across the empty apartment. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, moving swiftly down the hall outside. Running, Leo's chest tightened. He bolted to the nearest window, fumbling with the blinds, dragging them open. What he saw made his blood run cold. Out in the hallway beyond the apartment, a man stood. He stood. Leo saw himself. The same jacket, the same camera bag, the same wide, terrified eyes. And that other Leo was clawing at the steel door, trying to force it open, face contorted in panic. His fingernails scraped against the gouge in the metal, leaving bright marks in the rust. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, his flashlight beam jittering wildly across the blood-streaked walls. The footsteps outside grew frantic, pounding closer, and then the iron door shuddered under a heavy impact. The pounding shook the steel frame, echoing through the blood-streaked walls. Leo's flashlight beam danced across the empty room, quivering with his hand. He pressed himself against the far corner, staring at the door as though he could will it to hold. Outside, the running stopped. Silence stretched, thick and unnatural. Then came the breathing. It was frantic, shallow, pressed right against the steel. His own breathing, duplicated and thrown back at him. Every inhale rasped as though through his own throat. Every exhale shuddered as though torn from his own chest. Leo's stomach turned. The voice followed. "Let me in." It was his voice. Desperate. Raw. "Please. You have to open the door. They're coming." His flashlight flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. The shadows across the wall thickened, stretching longer than they should, crawling upward as if the light itself were afraid. He clutched the bar of his camera bag, shaking his head. No, that isn't me." The voice outside cracked into a sob. Nails scraped metal. "I'm you, Leo. Don't you see? I don't belong out here. You don't belong in there. We need to." A violent clang cut the words short, the sound of something heavy striking the door. The floor beneath him vibrated with the impact. Then another, and another. Each blow bent the steel inward, the gouge deepening, widening, as if the door were flesh yielding to repeated wounds. Leo stumbled back, boots crunching on the brittle crust that lined the floor. His flashlight beam swung wildly until it landed once more on the wall. The words there shimmered in the red-black smear. We were locked inside the 14th floor. The letters seemed to move as he watched, dripping downward, rewriting themselves. "We are you." Leo's chest tightened. He spun back toward the door. Just as the final blow landed, the steel groaned and snapped open. A thin strip of light from the hallway cut into the room, slicing through the gloom. And in that light, framed by the bent frame of the door, was another Leo. The same jacket, the same pale, terrified face. His double's eyes found him instantly, wide and pleading. "Help me," the other Leo whispered, voice shredded by panic. "Please." Then the shadow moved. It rose behind the double, huge and formless, blacker than the dark around it. Its arm, if it was an arm, shot forward and hooked around his double's chest. The man's scream echoed down the hall as the shadow dragged him back, away from the light, into the emptiness beyond. The steel door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a final verdict, rattling the bloody walls until silence swallowed everything again. Leo's flashlight sputtered. He was alone. But the words on the wall had changed once more, clear in the failing light. "Now it is your turn." The silence that followed the slam of the steel door was not empty. It pulsed. Leo felt it in his teeth, in the hollow of his chest, in the trembling bones of his hands. The quiet was alive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for him to move. His flashlight flickered again, throwing a trembling cone of light across the ruined apartment. The beam caught the walls, where the bloody letters had shifted once more. "Now, it is your turn." The words bled fresh, glistening as though written an instant ago. A slow rivulet dripped downward, pattering against the cracked tiles, sticky and wet. Leo's stomach clenched. He stumbled back toward the door, gripping the handle with both hands, yanking with every ounce of strength. The bar rattled but didn't give. The door that had burst open so violently only moments ago was sealed again, fused, shut, as though welded by unseen heat. "Let me out." His voice cracked. He slammed his fists against the steel, his knuckles splitting, but the sound came back to him strangely muffled, as if the metal had become more wall than door. The air thickened, warmer, sour with the copper stench of blood. He turned, flashlight sweeping across the apartment. The layout was changing. The living room he had stepped into stretched, elongating like pulled taffy. The walls warped outward, bending into impossible angles. Door frames twisted, corners widened into yawning gaps. His light revealed hallways where there had been none, narrow passages that bled into each other, branching like veins. He heard footsteps again, not frantic this time. Slow, deliberate. Each step reverberated through the warped halls, a heavy scrape followed by a drag, as though something vast shifted its weight. The sound grew closer, though he couldn't tell from where. Every direction seemed to carry it. Leo's heart hammered. He backed into one of the new corridors, the beam of his flashlight jerking across the walls. The hallway stretched on and on, longer than it had any right to be. Doors lined each side, identical, their brass numbers eaten away, leaving only faint gouges. Some rattled softly as though something behind them tested the latch. Others bulged outward, as though swollen with pressure from inside. He moved faster, boots crunching on the dried crust beneath him. His breath came shallow, ragged, echoing too loudly in the narrow passage. The footsteps followed, always behind him, never rushing, but steady, patient. He turned sharply into another hall, and another. The building's geometry betrayed him, folding into itself, reshaping. Each turn only led him deeper, further, and then his flashlight beam caught movement. A shadow at the end of the corridor, not cast by his light. It stood upright, taller than any human, its form rippling, edges bleeding into the air like smoke. As he froze, its head tilted, slowly, unnaturally, as though curious. The walls groaned. The doors along the corridor burst open one by one, slamming against their frames. Darkness spilled from within each room, thick and liquid, crawling across the floor. Leo bolted. He ran blind through the halls, his flashlight jerking wildly, his bag slamming against his hip. His lungs burned, his throat raw with every gasp. The corridor shifted under his feet, narrowing, then widening, floors tilting steeply downward like a chute. He tripped, skidded, slammed into a wall. His flashlight clattered away, spinning until its beam settled on the far end of the hall. The shadow was there, closer. Its limbs stretched along the walls, impossibly long, pressing into the plaster, leaving behind deep, black scars that pulsed like open wounds. Leo scrambled for the flashlight, snatched it, and ran again. His vision blurred with tears, the acrid air stinging his eyes. A staircase appeared ahead, narrow, winding upward. Salvation. He lunged for it, taking the steps two at a time. His breath tore in his throat, his heart threatening to split. But when he reached the top, there was no door, only another hallway, longer, darker, and lined with mirrors. He staggered forward, the flashlight catching dozens of reflections. His own face stared back at him from every angle, but the eyes were wrong, too wide, too hollow. Each reflection's mouth moved in unison, forming silent words he couldn't hear. He covered his ears, but the silence pressed in harder. Then, all at once, the reflection spoke, not with sound, but with breath that fogged the glass from the inside. We are you. You are us. The mirrors shattered. The hallway exploded with shards, slicing his arms, his cheeks, his throat. He screamed, clutching his face, stumbling blindly into another corridor. His blood mixed with the dried crust on the floor, the scent sharp in the stifling air. Behind him, the footsteps grew louder. Closer. The shadow had followed him through every turn, every impossible angle. It had no need to hurry. The halls bent to its will, carrying him always back to it. Leo collapsed against a doorframe, chest heaving. He looked back one final time. The shadow filled the corridor now, stretching floor to ceiling, wall to wall, its form a writhing mass of blackness that swallowed the faint light of his torch. Within it, he thought he saw faces, dozens, hundreds, their mouths opening in silent screams, their hands reaching outward, pressing against the surface as though trapped behind glass. He realized then what the words on the wall had meant. We were locked inside the 14th floor. It hadn't been residents. It hadn't been neighbors. It had been the curious, the ones who had found the stairwell, the ones who had opened the steel door. And now it was his turn. The shadow surged forward. Leo screamed and hurled himself down the nearest hallway, his flashlight beam slicing through the warped geometry. The corridors twisted and buckled, but there was no way out. Every door he tried was locked, every window bricked over. The 14th floor was not a place. It was a trap, and it had closed around him. Leo didn't remember how he found the stairwell. One moment the shadow was pouring toward him, swallowing the corridor, faces clawing from within its surface. The next, he was stumbling down concrete steps, his flashlight long gone, his hands raw from gripping the damp rail, his chest burned, his throat shredded from screams he barely remembered making. Down, always down. The stairs seemed endless, but at last a dim glow appeared below the faint light of the lobby. His boots hit marble, his knees buckled, but he staggered forward, shoving through the final door with a ragged cry. And suddenly, silence. The lobby of the Crest lay around him, immaculate. The glass doors gleamed. The concierge desk sat polished and empty. A faint fragrance of lemon polish drifted through the air. Leo collapsed onto the cool tiles, gasping, his sweat dripping in sharp contrasts against the pristine floor. He turned back, half expecting the stairwell door to shudder, to burst open with blackness. It did not. It stood still, harmless, as though nothing had ever been wrong. He laughed then, a broken, breathless laugh. Relief poured over him, cold and shaky. He was out. He had escaped. The elevator chimed softly nearby. 2 residents stepped out, chatting casually about their day. They barely glanced at him as they passed, though he must have looked wild. Clothes torn, face cut, eyes bloodshot. "Wait," Leo croaked. His voice cracked. "You have to listen. There's something wrong with the building. The 13th floor." One of the men stopped, brow furrowed. 13th floor? He looked at his friend, confused. "This place doesn't have a 13th floor. Everyone knows that." Leo stared. "What?" "No, I live there. 1307. The man's expression hardened into polite dismissal. He shook his head. "That unit's empty. Always has been." The two walked on, their voices fading. Leo's heart thundered. He staggered to the front desk. The concierge appeared then, a young woman in a crisp uniform, smiling professionally. "I need you to check," he rasped. "Apartment 1307. Leo Morales." "That's me. I signed the lease 2 weeks ago." The concierge tilted her head, typing quickly on the computer. A pause, then a smile, practiced and final. "There is no record of a Leo Morales, and 1307 is vacant. Has been for years." The screen glowed brightly, too brightly. He leaned closer, but the names there blurred, smearing as if the pixels themselves refused to show him. His stomach sank. He turned toward the elevator, desperation rising. The panel gleamed with its polished brass buttons. 12, 14, no 13, no hidden stairwell door, no evidence that his apartment had ever existed. The world tilted. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not right. I was there. I lived there." But even as he said it, the memories wavered. His camera gear, his furniture, his bed, they felt faint now, like images burned into film left too long in the sunday. He pressed his palms to his face, trembling, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw it. The 14th floor, the warped halls, the blood-streaked walls, the faces pressed into shadow, his own face among them. Leo lowered his hands, staring blankly at the lobby. Everything gleamed. Everything was normal. Residents passed, smiling, nodding politely, not seeing him at all. Not seeing him. He called out, but his voice carried no weight. The concierge continued her work, fingers tapping keys that made no sound. Leo stumbled toward the glass doors, but his reflection stopped him cold. It looked like him, yes. Same jacket, same cuts on his cheek, but the reflection's eyes were wide and hollow. Its mouth stretched slowly into a silent scream, and behind it, stretching across the polished surface of the glass, black scars crawled like cracks. The reflection pressed its hand against the glass. He raised his own without meaning to. The match was perfect. The lobby shimmered. For an instant, he smelled the copper sting of blood, felt the tremor of footsteps behind him, and then the reflection smiled. Not his smile, the smile of something that had already claimed him. Leo staggered back, but when he turned, the concierge was gone. The residents had vanished. The lobby lay empty. The silence deepened. Familiar now. Alive. He looked up toward the elevator panel one last time. The number glowed steadily. Leo's breath shuddered in his chest. He understood then. The people locked inside hadn't been residents at all. They had been everyone who had ever been curious. Everyone who had ever wondered why the 14th floor didn't exist. And now he was one of them. The lobby dissolved around him. The marble floor cracked into black crust. The walls stretched and warped. He was home again, on the 14th floor, waiting for the next tenant to listen to the footsteps above their ceiling, to follow the sound, to find the hidden door. Story 7. The Phantom Photographer. The studio was quiet except for the whir of the computer fan and the occasional click of Maya's mouse. Outside, the city had long since folded itself into silence. The street lamps below threw faint, amber pools across the cracked pavement. But up here, on the second floor of the old brick building, only the glow of the monitor lit the room. Maya hunched over her desk, rubbing her temple with ink-stained fingers. The coffee at her elbow had gone cold hours ago. She reached for it out of habit, then grimaced, setting it aside untouched. The files had come in earlier that afternoon, delivered on a thumb drive slipped into an unmarked envelope. No return address, no note of explanation, just a short request typed in plain black text. Please restore these. She had considered ignoring it. The studio wasn't hers, she freelanced, borrowing the space from an older photographer who rented it by the week. But work was scarce, and money was tighter. Restoration jobs paid. She had convinced herself it didn't matter where the photos came from. Now, hours later, she wasn't so sure. The images were old. 1,930 seconds, maybe 40 seconds. Family portraits, stiff and formal, captured in that washed-out sepia tone that seemed to leach warmth from the frame. Parents seated, children standing, everyone staring at the lens with solemn eyes. Perfectly ordinary at first, but when Maya zoomed in, she noticed something odd. In the far left corner of the frame, half obscured by the drape of a curtain, stood a shadow. It wasn't sharp. It blurred into the background, a smudge of darkness that might have been a trick of light. But the longer she looked, the more it resolved. A shoulder, the curve of a head. Someone was standing there. Maya frowned. She checked the file info. No notes, no edits logged. The shadow belonged to the original negative. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. Probably just a servant, she muttered, though the word felt outdated on her tongue. In old portraits, staff often lingered at the edges, forgotten, unnamed. Still, something about it made her uneasy. The figure didn't face the family. It didn't face the wall. It faced the camera. Maya shook herself. She selected the smudge with her lasso tool, feathered the edges, and began smoothing it into the curtain. Easy enough. A ghost erased with a few clicks. The restored version looked cleaner, brighter, normal. But when she saved the file and moved on to the next, her pulse quickened. Another family, another stiff arrangement, different faces, different clothing. But there, in the corner again, behind a standing lamp, this time was the same smudge of darkness. She zoomed in. The outline was clearer here. A man's silhouette. Broad shoulders, arms folded, almost casual. She bit her lip. No way, coincidence. The files weren't labeled, only numbered, and there were dozens. She opened them in quick succession, her unease mounting with every click. Every photo had the same thing, always at the edge, always blurred but unmistakable. A figure standing apart, lurking in shadow, staring through the lens. She told herself it was her exhaustion playing tricks, but her skin prickled, gooseflesh rising along her arms despite the warmth of the room. It wasn't just that the figure appeared in every shot. It was that it seemed closer each time. Maya sat back, rubbing her eyes. "Stop it," she whispered. "It's nothing." But her gaze drifted to the studio itself. The shelves sagged with dust-coated cameras, relics of another era. The air smelled faintly of developer chemicals, long soaked into the wood. In the corner, beneath the single bare bulb that swung faintly in the draft, stood an antique camera on a tripod. It hadn't worked in decades, but the glass eye of its lens gleamed as though wet, catching the glow of her monitor. She turned quickly back to the screen. The next image loaded. This time the figure wasn't blurred at all. The shadow had depth, form. A man, tall, dressed in dark clothes, holding something in front of his chest. She squinted, pulse hammering, as the pixels sharpened under her magnification. It was a camera, an old box model, heavy, with a gleaming lens, and the man holding it wasn't looking at the family he photographed decades ago. He was looking through the lens. At her, Maya's hand hovered over the mouse, knuckles white, pulse fluttering in her throat. She dragged the cursor slowly across the screen, enlarging the image inch by inch. The pixels bloomed, blurred, then sharpened again. The man was clearer now, not a smudge, not an accident of shadow. A tall figure, shoulders squared, posture stiff but deliberate. His hands gripped the sides of a box camera, the kind used in the early 20th century. Thick leather bellows stretched from the lens, metal brackets catching the light. But it wasn't the camera that made Maya's stomach twist. It was his eyes. She couldn't see them directly, the lens should have hidden them, a round black void reflecting nothing. Yet when she leaned closer, when her breath fogged faintly against the monitor, she felt them lock with hers, as though the man wasn't looking at the family frozen decades ago, as though he was peering straight through the photograph, through the screen, through time itself, at her. She jerked back, heart hammering. Her chair scraped loud against the wooden floor. The room seemed darker. She glanced at the old tripod in the corner. Its lens glimmered faintly, though the bulb overhead hadn't shifted. For a moment, she thought she saw a ripple of light across the glass, the faint shimmer of a shutter opening. Maya forced herself to breathe. "It's just a photo," she whispered. "Pixels, nothing more." She turned back to the screen. The file name blinked at her. Family, 7. She hadn't typed anything, but the underscore pulsed faintly, as if the file were breathing. She clicked open the next image. Another family, another stiff arrangement. And there he was again, clearer, closer. His outline no longer blurred. The camera's brass fittings caught the light, sharp and perfect. Maya leaned forward despite herself. She adjusted the levels, deepened the contrast, sharpened the edges. The man's face emerged, pale, angular, unsmiling, his gaze hidden but unmistakably fixed forward. The more she magnified, the more she felt the strange dissonance. His camera's lens pointed at her, not at the people in the photograph. Her hand trembled on the mouse. Click, zoom, the monitor flickered. A faint crack spread across the corner of the glass, spiderwebbing outward, as if under pressure. Maya flinched back, expecting a pop, but the screen held. Her reflection wavered in the glass, her own wide eyes staring back at her beside his. For a moment they overlapped. Her face and his camera lens fused into one. A sound broke the stillness. Click, not from the computer, from behind her. She spun. The studio was empty. The shelves sagged with dust. The tripod in the corner stood silent. Yet the sound was unmistakable, the hollow snap of a shutter, mechanical and final. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. She turned back to the screen, trying to steady her breath. The next file had already opened. She hadn't touched the mouse. This one was empty of families. Only the man remained, centered in the frame now. Camera held square before his face, lens glinting, aimed directly outward. Maya's vision tunneled. The hum of the computer fan deepened, warped, until it sounded like a breath. The glow of the screen seemed to push outward, spilling shadows into the room. Click. The sound again. Behind her. Closer. She whipped around, but the corners of the studio seemed to thicken, shadows coiling tighter, darker than they should be. Her eyes strained, searching for movement, but the blackness absorbed everything. Click, click, click. Rapid now. A series of shutters snapping in succession. She felt the phantom strobe of flashes against her skin, though the room remained dark. Her throat closed. She turned back toward the monitor with dread pooling in her stomach. A new file glowed on the desktop. She hadn't opened it. She hadn't saved it. But there it was, pulsing faintly with its own light. File name, Maya, 1. Her hand hovered over the mouse, trembling. She didn't want to click. She had to click. The image filled the screen. Her, sitting at her desk, bathed in the glow of the monitor, mouth slightly open in fear, but her face was blurred, warped, as though someone had smeared it with wet paint. And in the far corner of the room, half in shadow, stood the man with the camera. Lens raised, waiting. Maya's breath fogged the monitor as she leaned forward, unwilling to look, unable to turn away. Her blurred face stared back at her from the photo file. Maya, 1. A distortion, like someone had pressed a wet thumb across the image, erasing what made her recognizable. And there, in the far corner of the frame, the man stood tall, rigid, camera raised, the black lens gleaming like an unblinking eye. She pressed the keyboard. Escape. Delete. Nothing responded. The cursor froze. The screen locked. Behind her, the studio breathed. The air seemed heavier, thicker, shadows pulling at the edges of her vision. The corners of the room no longer obeyed the geometry she knew. They bent inward, darker, swallowing the faint glow of the desk lamp until only the monitor lit the space. Click. The shutter snapped again, loud, so close she could almost feel the vibration in her spine. Majestic. The room stretched behind her, shelves lined with old cameras, their lenses catching the glow in faint pinpricks of light. For a heartbeat, she swore they were all pointed at her. Silent glass eyes, waiting. Click, click, 2 in rapid succession. From just over her shoulder, her throat closed. She turned sharply but found only air, heavy and stale. Her pulse raced. She stumbled back into her chair, clutching the edge of the desk for balance. The screen flickered. A new file appeared beneath Maya. 1. Maya. 2. She whispered. No. The image opened without her command. It showed her again moments later. Standing this time, body half-turned, terror etched into the curve of her shoulders. The blur across her face had spread, melting her features into a smear of gray static. And in the image, the man with the camera had stepped closer. His shadow reached long across the floor, stretching toward her like spilled ink. Click, click, click. The shutters fired again, relentless now, their rhythm filling the studio like a second heartbeat. She clapped her hands over her ears, but the sound burrowed through her palms, vibrating against her skull. It wasn't just noise. It was presence. It was proof. Someone was here. She staggered forward, away from the desk, eyes darting to the door. The exit sign above it glowed faintly red, but the knob seemed farther than it should have been, the wall pulling away as if receding into a tunnel. Click. The doorframe appeared on the monitor screen, captured in perfect detail. Click. Her own back filled the next image, frozen mid-step. Click. A close-up of her hand reaching for the knob. Her stomach dropped. The photos weren't documenting the past. They were documenting the present. Her present. Maya screamed and lunged for the mouse, dragging the cursor wildly. She tried to close the files, shut down the program. Anything. The monitor flickered again. Maya 3. Maya 4. Maya 5. Each one opening in sequence, each one capturing her exact movements from seconds before. She saw herself screaming, her mouth twisted into a silent wail, her hands clawing at the keyboard. She saw herself framed in the doorway, blurred face turning back toward the screen. And always, always, the man was there, closer. Each photo placed him nearer, stepping steadily across the studio, camera fixed on her, shutter never ceasing. Click, 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 click. The sound filled the room now, deafening, overlapping, impossible. She turned in a frantic circle, but the studio dissolved into darkness, broken only by the relentless glow of the monitor. The walls stretched and warped, their corners bending away, leaving her on an island of light surrounded by nothing. The shelves were gone, the floor was gone. Only the camera remained, not hers, his. Directly in front of her now, so close she could see the scuffs on its brass fittings, the fingerprint smears on its lens. The shutter snapped one more time, blinding her with a flash that came not from the computer, not from any bulb, but from the black heart of the machine itself. She fell to her knees, clutching her head, the afterimage burning behind her eyes. When she dared to open them, the monitor displayed a single new file. Maya, Nim, Koi. Her hand shook as she reached for the mouse. She told herself not to, begged herself to stop, but some terrible compulsion dragged the cursor forward, clicking the name open. The photo filled the screen. Her, kneeling on the floor, hands pressed to her head. Her face was almost gone now, dissolved into static, unrecognizable, and in the corner of the frame, the man with the camera loomed tall, the black lens staring at her, wider than ever. as though it had already consumed her. The studio behind her was darker than the real one, but when she glanced over her shoulder, it matched perfectly. Click. The shutters were no longer single clicks. They were a storm. Click, 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 an endless barrage. Like hail hammering glass, like bones cracking in rhythm. The sound surrounded Maya, rising from the walls, the floor, the very air. It pulsed through her ribcage, vibrated in her teeth, turned her vision into fragments of strobe-lit moments. Dark, light, dark, light. Each flash seemed to peel away the studio she knew, layer by layer, replacing it with something older, fouler. The wallpaper melted into raw plaster streaked with damp. The shelves collapsed into skeletal frames. Their cameras rusted and broken. The desk dissolved into dust under her trembling hands. Only the monitor remained, its glow unyielding. The photo on the screen shifted. It was no longer still. The man with the camera moved. He leaned forward, his shoulders rising and falling with a measured breath. The box camera in his hands tilted slightly, lens adjusting, searching. Maya stumbled backward, bile burning in her throat. No, this isn't real. But the photo disagreed. He stepped closer, one deliberate stride, and the frame widened to accommodate him, as though the screen were a window, and the world inside stretched deeper, darker, hungrier. The shadows in the room thickened, curling up the walls like smoke. They reached across the ceiling in twisting fingers, converging above her. The shutters snapped faster, faster, until the sound was no longer distinct but a rolling thunder, a machine gun rhythm that shook her bones. And then silence. Maya froze. The screen went black. For a heartbeat, she thought it was over. But then faintly, the glow returned. Not as an image this time, as a reflection. Her reflection. She stood in the center of the studio, hair wild, eyes wide, mouth trembling. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, in the reflection, the man stood, closer than he had ever been. The lens of his camera loomed over her shoulder like a second face, its black circle swallowing the glow of the monitor. Maya spun. Nothing. Only shadow. She turned back. On the screen, the man raised the camera higher, preparing to fire. His fingers closed over the shutter release. No, she whispered, backing away. Her heel struck the leg of the old tripod in the corner. It toppled, clattering across the floor with a metallic shriek. The noise echoed like a scream. And then, in the silence that followed, the man stepped out. Not from the door, not from the shadows, from the screen. The surface of the monitor rippled like water, bulging outward. His form pressed against it, stretching pixelated skin across the glass until it cracked, then split. Shards fell in a tinkling rain as his body emerged, tall and rigid, dripping with static light. The box camera was clutched in his hands, ancient leather and brass glistening as if wet. Maya collapsed to the floor, crawling backward, nails scraping against the wood. Stay away from me. The man did not hurry. He stepped onto the studio floor as though it belonged to him, as though he had always been there. His shoes left no sound. His pale face remained expressionless, eyes hidden behind the dark lens he carried. He raised the camera. Maya's breath came in ragged gasps. She grabbed the fallen tripod, swung it wildly. Metal clanged against his arm, but he did not flinch. The camera never wavered. The shutters began again. Not one, not two, a fusillade. Click, 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 click. Each flash blinded her, seared her eyes. Her skin prickled, burned, as if the light itself were flaying her. Her blurred face filled her vision again and again, smeared across the walls, across the floor, projected in infinite copies. Every surface bore her distortion, her erasure. The man took another step forward, and another. Maya screamed, swinging until the tripod snapped in half. She hurled the pieces, but they dissolved into shadow before reaching him. The camera loomed closer. The lens filled her sight. Her own reflection stared back from its black surface, distorted, hollow, already vanishing. Don't, she sobbed. Please don't. The shutter clicked one last time. White flooded the room. The flash drowned everything. White heat filled the studio, searing Maya's eyes, flooding her lungs with silence. For a moment she floated weightless in it, suspended as though the world itself had been wiped clean. Then it was gone. She was gone. The tripod lay broken on the floor. The shelves of cameras slouched in their dust. The old bulb overhead flickered once, then steadied. The studio looked unchanged, as though nothing had happened, except for the monitor. It glowed softly in the dark, humming faintly, its fractured glass somehow whole again. On the screen was a single file. The cursor hovered over it, though no hand touched the mouse. The file opened with a slow inevitability, blooming across the display. The photo was perfect, crisp, detailed. Maya sat in her chair, head tilted slightly, as if waiting for the shudder she knew would come. But her face was blurred, erased, smudged into a featureless smear. Her hands lay still on the desk, fingers splayed, and behind her, filling the corner of the studio, stood the man, tall, silent, the box camera poised at his chest. The lens stared outward, its black glass wider than before, darker than before, as though it had swallowed not only the light but the last fragments of Maya herself. Click. The sound rang faintly in the room, though no shutter moved. The photo flickered once. The lights in the studio died. The monitor went black. For a moment, all was silent. Then the screen reflected. Not an image this time, just the faint glimmer of the room, the shadowed shelves, the broken tripod, and her face. Maya's face, hovering in the reflection, pale and uncertain. Her features wavered as though beneath water. The edges of her eyes dissolved first, then her mouth, until only the ghost of her outline remained, a smear of gray vanishing into shadow. The reflection shuddered once, twice, then thinned to nothing. Darkness claimed the glass, and the studio stood waiting, quiet and empty, as if ready for the next envelope to arrive, the next restorer to sit at the desk, the next pair of eyes to stare too long into the lens. The camera would be there. It always was. And that was the last of them. 7 stories, each carrying their own ending or not an ending at all. Maybe you found yourself in one of them. Maybe you heard an echo of your own footsteps in a hallway that shouldn't exist. Maybe you felt the lens turn toward you. But don't worry. Stories like these don't stay here. They travel, they follow, they linger long after the telling is done. If you close your eyes now, and the silence feels heavier than before, if you hear a creak, or a scrape, or the faint tick of a clock, where none should be, don't panic. It's only the night, reminding you that it's still awake. Thank you for keeping me company in these late hours. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights low, and your ears open, because the stories never end. They just wait for someone to listen.